2% overall, I think, something like that. So did you do anything fun over the holidays? Kids came home from college. My daughter
Good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and take our seats. Good morning, everybody. While everyone's getting settled, it's nice to see you all. Welcome to this session of the Working Group and Science Coordination Group meeting. We have our co-chairs at the front here, and we did ask our members to come prepared today to participate in an open discussion to help us set the format, the structure, and the topics for our meetings throughout 2023. We have a number of meetings scheduled coming up this year, and we want to make the best use of that time and the best use of your time to to leverage the working group and the science coordination group and the work that's being done in the restoration of the saltwater ecosystem. So with that as a kickoff, I'd like to introduce our co-chairs, and I'll just go right down the line.
Gotta hold it. Hey, everybody. It's been a while since we've been in the same room together. I'm really excited to have a face-to-face meeting where we can see each other's expressions. Everyone's a little bit more talkative. I think we get more out of these meetings when we're all together and we're not multitasking because we're all so busy. So I'm really excited about today. I'm Lawrence Glenn. I'm the chair of the Science Coordination Group, and I'm just thrilled to have this meeting to plan out how we're going to attack our work in the upcoming year. Thank you.
Lawrence, thank you so much. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. In my haste, I forgot to introduce myself for the record and everybody in the room. James Erskine, Everglades coordinator with FWC and chair of the working group. Nick?
Nick Allman, regional science advisor for U.S. Geological Survey. I wonder, at some point I want to make a just brief few comments about gear. Would that be now, or there's a better time in the agenda?
Nick, you're welcome to do it right now.
Just very quickly, an update on our Greater Everglades Ecosystem Restoration Conference, April 17th through the 20th in Coral Springs. So for those of you going to the Everglades Coalition, it's the same conference hotel. We had a massive input of abstracts. We had 42 contributed sessions, which hit a record. In fact, the problem is it took up most of our oral presentation slots. And so we're going to be having to move a lot of people to posters, and that always creates great angst. So hope that you ask your folks and your staff if we have to do that. For folks that presented or submitted individual abstracts that weren't part of an organized session, we just don't have the room. And that's great news. It's also bad news because people that really wanted to give an oral presentation might have to do posters. Anyway, we look forward to seeing you all there. We have We cut out one plenary session just to make room for more oral presentations. Our opening plenary will be by Dave Krabenhoff, who recently retired from USGS. It's done 3 decades of mercury research in the Everglades and across the world, actually. And we'll have our DIG session, the Design Innovation Governance Talks, organized by Fred Sklar here at the Water Management District. That's become a very popular feature of GEAR. And then our closing keynote speaker will be none other than Shannon Estenos, our Assistant Secretary of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. So we're hoping that she will be a good draw to keep everyone around to the very last of the conference. If you have any questions about GEAR, please let me know, and I hope to see everybody there.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Gina Ralph with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm sitting in today for Angie Dunn. She sends her wishes. She wishes she could be here. She is actually teaching today. Since Nick talked about GEAR, I'd like to put in a shameless plug for the GEAR Recover sessions. There will be 2 of them this year. Amanda Kahn, who's in the audience, is one of the session leads, as am I. So I think we'll have a really good program for everyone. Glad to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairs. Adam?
Thank you, James. Good to see everybody here again, and thanks for those in attending and those online watching this important meeting as we chart the course of this next year. There's a lot of flexibilities built in that the chairs have built into today's meeting to hear from you all of what we're doing today. If I may, James, go into the next section.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, again, this is the planning session for the next year. We have tentatively scheduled, and it's based on the feedback today, the dates of March 14th and 15th, possibly June 29th, September 6th and 7th, and June 30th. The next task force meeting, we have concurrence from most of all the members of a June 1 task force date. So we'll be targeting that. We're looking for a venue on the West Coast, and we'll be making some determinations in the next 2 or 3 weeks for that exact location. Again, we could be having 2-day sessions. They could be 1 week apart, however you all want to go, responding to some of the comments and, during previous meetings and how we go to deal with all of the science and policy-related items in restoration with the just tremendous momentum with the great news that we've heard from the governor's office and other, financial support. And the system is responding. Anyway, James and Lawrence, as your chairs, will be helping to facilitate today's discussion, and along with Alan Childress and Sandy Soto on the OERI team. So anyway, that's some general announcements. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Adam. And just for everybody in the room and everybody online, we will recognize all of our members and our online participants once we finish with some of the front matter that's here. So I'd like to remind everyone the session is being recorded. We have 2 presentations today on our schedule, one from CISERP and one covering Recover, to build on what you had mentioned, Gina. And the other topics, those are 2 topics that we know need our attention moving into 2023. And the goal is to think about what other topics to get us stimulated and stimulate our brains a little bit. Let us know what else we might need to talk about as we move forward. Sandy, would you go over the administrative procedures for the meeting?
Good morning, everyone. So we have scheduled 1 public comment period on the agenda for members of the public. Those providing public comment in person, please fill out a blue card and give it to anyone on the OERI staff. Those on Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of your Zoom window. Please refrain from raising your hand until the public comment period has been announced. Raised hands before the public comment period will be lowered by the administrator. Once the public comment period begins, please raise your hands and we will call on you and unmute your microphone one at a time. When you have been called on to speak, please ensure that all other devices are muted to avoid any background noises and interruptions. If any attendee experiences any Zoom technical issues during the meeting, you can access the webcast on EvergladesRestoration.gov. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Sandy. We'd like to go right around the room now. I'll start with Ed Smith.
Thank you, James. Ed Smith, Director for the Office of Water Policy and Ecosystems Restoration with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. It's great to be here in person. As Lawrence said, it's always nice to be able to look people in the eyes and get good feedback on what we're saying, what we're doing. Excited about the planning today and looking forward to what we can come up with. there's a lot coming, and I think it's going to be an exciting year for Everglades Restoration, and really looking forward to announcements in the very near future.
Deb Drum?
Hi, good morning. My name is Deb Drum. I'm with Palm Beach County's Environmental Resources Management. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Mark?
Hey, Mark Rains, Chief Science Officer, State of Florida, Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I appreciate the opportunity to come here face-to-face and talk about our roles and responsibilities. I'm probably, perhaps, the newest member of this group, and I've been struggling myself to understand how to engage in this conversation and how my engagement results in outcomes, and so I'm really looking forward to a chance to sort of have that broad, open discussion later this afternoon to figure out how to make this work going forward.
Rebecca?
Rebecca Elliott, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Office of Agricultural Water Policy, and really great to be here in person and actually be seeing people again and looking them in the eyes and sharing some stories. I think everyone really is excited about doing the planning and the meetings that are coming up, and I look forward to, gathering information, providing the input that I can, but also working with FDACs at the state level to maybe bring some more people and, information into this venue. So, good to be here.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Good morning, Stephanie Romaniak with the U.S. Geological Survey. I'll just follow on the conversation about gear just to say that we also will have a session on Cape Sable Seaside Sparrow new science. I know there's always a lot of interest one way or the other in the sparrow, and we could only fit 5 presentations in a session, so there is additional sparrow science that's being presented at GEAR as well. Thanks.
Roland?
Good morning. I'm Roland Ottolini. I'm Director of Lee County's Division of Natural Resources. It's certainly nice to get out of Lee County for a little while. As you know, we got hit pretty hard with Hurricane Ian, and all I've been sleeping, drinking, and eating is debris removal. And now it's interesting, just the mindset of folks. Their first need is to be able to get back to their property. Then it's having water and electricity, and then getting rid of the debris of all the materials coming out of your house. Well, now they're finally starting to get out and a little bit of restoration activity. They're finally starting to go in their backyards and finding trees down in their creeks and streams, and also wanting to visit the beach. And boy, there's debris on the beach, so it's going to be a nonstop debris removal process for the next several years. And it's interesting that it's now evolving to the environment and then trying to get in there. We have a lot of boats that have been lifted up out of the water from high tidal surge and planted in the mangroves, and somehow we're going to be able to find ways to get that material out of there. So I'm looking forward to working with you all and maybe give me some ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Good morning. Jennifer Hecker, Executive Director of the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership, part of the U.S. EPA National Estuary Program. And like Roland mentioned, the 10 counties that we serve all were impacted heavily by Hurricane Ian, so that's been at the forefront of our mind. We also, though, have good news that we have benefited from the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, and so we now have more money than ever to do ecosystem restoration, including Western Everglades restoration, so we're very happy to be here today and very excited, as many others have mentioned, by having this meeting in person. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Christopher?
Chris Kelble with NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory. Just glad to be back here in person and looking forward to the meeting today. Thank you.
Jennifer?
Jennifer Reynolds. I'm the Director of Ecosystem Restoration and Capital Projects here at the district. I just wanted to, it's really an exciting time to be together thinking about how do we set goals with all of the work that's going on and really leverage this group to collaborate on how do we measure those goals and objectives. And so I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. That said, I have to mention that I have to leave in about 45 minutes to go and help celebrate with the Corps up at the Herbert Hoover Dike As many of you know, and hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow, they're doing the ribbon cutting for the completion of that tremendous project. While not a direct restoration project, absolutely part of the bigger picture. And so that's one of the things that I think we have to think about today is how do we make sure that all of these activities and efforts that our different agencies are working on, how are we communicating the linkages between all of these things and how they affect our restoration picture? Because there is so much going on right now, which comes at sort of a minor hazard, I think, because it's really easy for any of us, all of our agencies, to sort of move out at full speed in a certain direction and forget to communicate with each other and make sure that we're leveraging opportunities to have the end state be a total that is greater than the sum of all of our parts. And so I just sort of challenge us to start thinking about that as we go through today. And so I made some extra comments now because I'm not sure I'll be here to be able to make them later. But thanks for putting this together, and thanks for seeing everybody in person for a little while today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. John?
John Mayle, Martin County Ecosystem Restoration and Management Division Manager. It's just great to be here. Thank you.
Eric?
So Eric Stabenow with the National Park Service, Branch Chief of Restoration Sciences. And I take a moment to notice that we have the SysRep and Recover presentations today, which really are highlighting the idea of coordinating and working together and having a very clear plan of where we're going as additional funds and resources are brought to bear on it. Another thing that we notice is that in addition to being a first face-to-face, we've got some empty chairs around the room because so many of us are running to the next thing that we're celebrating. So it's a good opportunity to celebrate, but it's a good opportunity to stay focused on that coordination along the way. So thank you.
Karen?
Good morning, Karen Bonesack with NOAA's Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. I'm just happy to be here and meet most of you in person for the first time, so look forward to the discussion.
Chad?
Good morning, Chad Kennedy, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and a representative on the Science Coordination Group, and happy to be here.
Jed?
Good morning, this is Jed Redwine. I'm Jed Redwine with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I'm here also on behalf of Whitney Sapienza, who's the working group representative, and just happy to be here today.
Thank you. Craig?
Hi, good morning. Craig van der Heijden. I represent the Miccosukee. I'm their Fish and Wildlife Director, and I'm new to the group, so I'm looking forward to learning from all our partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Larry?
Hi, everybody. I'm Larry Williams with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm a member of the working group. And I think today I'll also be representing Bonnie Irving. She couldn't be here. She's under the weather, and she's a member of the Science Coordinating Group, so I'll try to represent her role as best I can. And I wanted to say a great big thank you to Governor DeSantis in the state of Florida. The executive order that came out, I think it was on January 10th, it had, I think, record levels of funding for Everglades restoration. It had some incredible commitments to the Indian River Lagoon and coastal resiliency and wildlife corridors. And when I read it, it just made my heart feel warm. So really appreciate all the commitments in there. Thank you.
Thanks to everybody in the room. I'd like to move to our online members now. Melanie Naja.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry. The video is not working. The camera is not working. I hope that you can hear me. I am here sitting down for Pedro Ramos. He sends his best regards and his regrets that he cannot attend the meeting. Basically, at the park, we are very busy getting ready to welcome important visitors during the weekend and early next week. Secretary Haaland and Assistant Secretary Estenos are both coming to visit the park. I'm personally looking forward for the meeting and for the discussion. Meanwhile, I have two important updates for you from the park. First is, they are both coming from Florida Bay. So the first one is basically the bloom that was present in the park in Florida Bay for the entire 2022, starting diminishing in November, and now is now shrinking only to the northern part of the bay to Garfield Bight. So that's great news. The bay, almost all the bay is clear from the bloom. And then the second update for you guys is that during the holidays, we experienced a severe cold front. The water temperature decreased to 9 degrees centigrade. And this basically, we had, this impacted the fish. We had several fish kills that were reported across the bay, including redfish, tarpon, and snook. And that was observed and documented. So these are the updates from the park. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Becky Allenbach?
Good morning, everyone. I've tried to turn on my video, but it says that the host has stopped it. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to turn that on. But I did want to say I'm Becky Allenbach. I'm EPA's Senior Advisor for South Florida and Everglades issues. Sorry that I can't be there in person, but I certainly plan to be there for the March meeting and look forward to meeting you all in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becky. Dan Scheit?
Good morning. Dan Scheit. I'm the EPA rep on the Science Coordination Group, and I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Joan Browder?
Hello, can you hear me? This is Joan.
We got you, Joan. Good morning.
Okay, I'm with NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, and I'm also on the panel for Biscayne Bay, the state panel, and I see opportunities to cooperate and collaborate and communicate to help Biscayne Bay. And I think that the working group and science coordination group could play a good role in that. There's already a lot of collaboration among agencies in reducing the nutrients and pollutants going into the bay. There's a lot of phenomenal things that have been happening lately, but I'd like to see another emphasis too, another opportunity to look into the needs for circulation, improved circulation in the Northern Bay, and how that can be helped with modeling and collaboration with the Departments of Transportation and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. When work is being done, infrastructure type work, like raising roads and bridges, if we can't also have an opportunity to open up some of those roads and bridges, those causeways and bridges that are restricting the flow to the bay. First of all, using modeling to help us inform us about where's the best way to do this, and do we need to do this? So that's the emphasis and opportunity that I see that the task force and working group and science coordination group could play a big role in. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. And Wes Brooks. Wes, I've saved you for last for help the agenda flow here. After your introduction, we're going to take up the matter of ratifying your nomination for chair of the Florida Reef Coordination Team. Wes?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I unfortunately got called away to cold Washington, D.C. today, so a little jealous that you all are there and just a stone's throw away from some sunny 80-degree weather outside. But I will be down later this evening to help celebrate the Herbert Hoover Dike completion and hopefully see all of you at the Everglades Coalition Conference later in the week. I also want to thank Adam Gelber and his fantastic team for pulling this session together to help steer our efforts for this year. And I appreciate the leadership and service of our chairs and vice chairs. So thank you, James, Lawrence, Nick, and Angie via Gina today. Our priorities from the state's perspective are pretty clear. So clear, in fact, that the governor memorialized them in an executive order 2 weeks ago. And that'll really guide the work and the priorities for all the state members of these groups. And if you haven't gotten around to reading it yet, like Larry clearly did, I recommend that you try and do so. And I'm happy to share the link with everybody if needed. The questions I would just ask everybody to think about today are our goals as supporting bodies for the task force just as transparent and clear as that executive order? Does the task force itself have specific goals that it seeks to accomplish in the next 1, 2, 5 years? I think that's really what we need to think about and discuss today, because ultimately, if we succeed in our charge and within our authorities, we'll set the task force up to make some really important and consequential decisions for the restoration of the South Florida ecosystem that'll carry us through into the next decade. So let's get to work.
Thank you very much, Wes. And now our members may remember there was a selection process, and Wes was selected as the interim chair of the Florida Reef Coordination Team via the email process that was in late September. This meeting is the first time we've been together face to face, and it's our opportunity to ratify that. That was a vote in September. So at this stage, we'd like to go just ask if there was any objections to that. And if there are no objections, it'll move forward as ratified as chairman of the Florida Reef Coordination Team by unanimous vote. So I'll just pause for a moment to let the members, if there's any objection, to be heard. No objection. Ratified by unanimous vote. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we've been joined, Amy Castaneda.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was crazy.
Excellent. And Wes, go forth and do good things with the FCRT. Thank you for your service. Lawrence?
I just wanted to, before we get on to presentations, just kind of talk about, we have had a request and a recommendation. So at the task force meeting in Washington, D.C., Recover, Gina, presented, and she made a request to the task force from a Recover standpoint. One was to have a workshop conducted by the Science and Coordination Group to help get them on track with their monitoring and assessment plan update, and wanting to find out all of the science that's being done throughout the greater Everglades, SERP, non-SERP, and this was a real good source or use of, I think, the Science Coordination Group, working group, to be able to do that. So she's asked for a workshop there. And then on kind of dovetails into that, in the SysRep report that just came out, there was a call for updating our research plan. And so I think it behooves us, as Recover provides so much science for what we are doing in SERP and Everglades restoration, to kind of dovetail our effort of how we're going to go through this update, along with the effort that Recover is doing, so that we make sure that we're in lockstep as we're moving forward. So I think the two presentations that are coming today, kind of going over what SysRep said in their report and what's going on in Recover, will set a real good stage for getting everyone thinking about what do we need to accomplish this year past the science plan, what goes into the science plan, what type of things do we need to discuss here that we can leverage everybody's knowledge in this room to help us make something, that a product that is highly, highly useful, and that someone can pick up and say, oh, I get it. You know, whether I'm a scientist, I'm a layperson, or I'm a manager, or I'm a construction person for SERP. So I just thank you all for being here in person today. Angie and I, as Science Coordination Chair and Vice Chair, we're both pretty new. We just got, inducted or confirmed this year. Being new, we're both really eager. We are excited. We want to move forward. We also don't know everything at all. So we're very fortunate to have both, Nick and James, who have been here and tenured, and the DOI team behind us. So we are happy to lead this effort, to move it forward with everybody here's help. And we just want to make sure we put out the best product possible. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lawrence. I'd just like to say, this is Jed from the Seminole Tribe. I'd like to understand what the online accessibility option is so I can share it with my team. We weren't aware that we could attend virtually today, but now that it's clear that some are attending virtually, we would like to know how we could use that option for the attendees who aren't present.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. Typically, the link has always been provided for the public access because just wanting to make sure that they're here and involved and have that access of those that don't do this every day on a day-to-day basis. That has always been there, and if you so choose that that's something that you would like to do, we can facilitate that. Obviously, we feel like we get more engagement in a face-to-face kind of situation, but if the group feels that we go back to having more virtual options for members, then that's clearly in the purview, and I apologize for not making that known to other members. My bad.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. And I just want to say, Whitney can attend today if she's available, if she can utilize the online option, but I don't have access to that. So if I could work with your staff, we may be able to have Whitney present with us today.
Yeah, Kevin, can you reach out?
In addition to that, Adam, I'll add for any staff that's an interactive side. It's also being recorded and live streamed on Zoom on the OERI YouTube page. Of course, that's not an interactive on the YouTube page, but I think the staff is going to follow up with Whitney.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to our kickoff presentations. We'll go to CISRP with the overview by Bob Johnson. Bob, you out there?
I'm out there. Can you hear me?
We got you now. Thank you.
And again, I can't turn on my video because it's been blocked by the host, but you don't need to see me anyway.
And we got your slides up.
Okay. Well, thank you for including this on the agenda. I do think the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine has been providing a lot of really stellar review and recommendation of Everglades restoration activities since 2000. So I think it's important for us to at least remember kind of how we got where we are and where we're going. Go to the next slide. Okay, since there's probably a few people that are new to what the Committee on Independent Scientific Review of Everglades Restoration Progress, or CISRP, is, I want to give at least one background slide. So the Water Resource Development Act of 2000 that established the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan has a requirement for biennial reports that provide these three components: an assessment of the progress in restoring natural system, an evaluation of the specific engineering and science issues that may impact progress in achieving our goals, and reviewing the monitoring and assessment protocols to be used for evaluation of CERP progress and results. This is the 9th biennial report that just came out in November, and it covered, you can see the key topics beyond the chapters that give restoration progress and the context of restoration. They had specific chapters on sort of funding developments and how we prioritize investments, one on stormwater treatment area performance, and one on climate change integration into CERP, and particularly where we are with BBCR. And then there was another chapter that was really focused on how science can be used to support decision making. And so it had a lot of conversations about the recover and MAP program that Gina was just talking about how we're tracking our restoration progress and our overall science enterprise, particularly related to modeling, strategic planning, and interagency coordination. So they've been doing this as CISREP for 18 years. Prior to that, there was a 5-year effort on the Committee on Restoration of the Greater Everglades Ecosystem, CROGE. So there's a wealth of information provided in these reports. In the last 4 reports, they've really focused a lot on how science support for SERP decision-making needs to transition from the early days where we were focused primarily on planning into this new rapid pace of implementation and operational testing. How do we go from the targets and performance measures we put in at the beginning for the modeling assessments and use that same information for evaluations at the end to determine, are we getting the benefits of the projects that we anticipated? So that's been a really common theme for the last 4 reports. Go to the next slide. Have you advanced the slide?
It's not advancing.
Hang tight, Bob.
No, it's there, but it's not there.
Go back.
See, it's changed in here. It's not changing up there.
Hang tight as we work through some technical difficulties in the room.
No, it's changing here. It's not changing there. It's changing here, but it's not changing up there. Dice display, so that's not. Which one did we do? We did this one to turn it on, right? That's the big one, yeah, that's how. The dice is off. They're doing something from upstairs. Okay. You need the music. The only thing I can think of might be to turn it off.
I have these slides up on my end, so if there's any way for the host to not block my video, I could continue with the slides, advancing them on my end.
No, it's up top to 6.
Still on.
Thanks, Bob. I'm going to leave that question up to our technical team.
Don't touch it for a second.
They're working on it upstairs. Yeah.
I have to restart.
Let's see where it is.
Bob, we have the staff at OEI communicating with the Water Management District to get this worked out, but there isn't the opportunity to open up the video on your end right now.
Nope.
Let's give this a minute to get resolved, and I'm going to fill some of the dead air with Nick. It's really good news what you said about your gear conference. The fact that there is such an interest that builds on this momentum we have right now, and you had an overwhelming response to the solicitation.
Yep, I'll stop there for a second because I think the slide's back. But that is true. It was a record number of submissions. I also want to mention that we're going to have a nice introductory social hour on Monday night, which is traditionally the way we open gear. So I encourage folks to come to that too.
Bob, we got you back up, and I think the slides are rolling through now. We're on your second slide titled, What's the Science Plan?
Okay. So Chapter 6 in the CISREP 9th biennial report, the one that came out in November was focused on Everglades restoration science planning. And I just want to give you a quick primer on basically what they are saying in their recommendations. So first, how does the SIBRIP committee define a science plan? And they say it's a set of specific activities that can guide the investment of resources across multiple agencies with the application of skills of agency, scientists, academia, and contractors. And it's focused on filling knowledge gaps that are critical to restoration decision-making. So it's not just developing a plan, it's developing a plan to answer the specific questions that are needed by the agencies implementing restoration projects. The science plan needs recognized as a multiple group priority. So basically like the science coordination group and the working group, it has to be the priorities that all of the agencies, tribes, federal, state, and local agree are the priorities, and they have to be feasibly to implement and perform. And they need to be developed by not just scientists, but scientists, managers, policymakers, and have this, as we just talked about this morning, this common set of shared priorities. And I like the recommendation of like a 5-year plan, moving forward with that through these agency coordination efforts, what we always do. They want a consolidated list of high priority science projects, much like what Gina was talking about. But this includes also model development, targeted data collection, data analysis, synthesis, reviewing all the system-wide monitoring and looking for any gaps, everything that collectively supports Everglades restoration from a science perspective. And they want to make sure that this process focuses on continued learning about ecosystem vulnerabilities, particularly the vulnerabilities associated with climate change, sea level rise, and they want us to periodically refine both the project and systems operations to respond to changing conditions and inform any new projects and design that are coming. So they recommended an annual update, which I think would, be very difficult, but some cycle of updates they're recommending to make sure it stays fresh and applicable. Go to the next slide. And they lay out basically what they identify as the tasks to complete a science plan. And the first is identification of knowledge gaps, which starts with what Gina talked about, the monitoring assessment plan review, identify all the ongoing work and then what's missing. Then coordinates the science to advance the exchange of knowledge, and then identification of established and focused science actions necessary to support that progress. The science actions are additional modeling, additional data synthesis, expanded monitoring networks, all the things that might be needed to support the process. And these tasks should be undertaken concurrently with the work that's already being done. They're not asking us to stop anything. They're asking us to do this while we're implementing the science that's already being incorporated into planning in SERP and non-SERP projects. In their minds, this science plan, this Everglades science plan would be a parallel to the integrated delivery schedule. So you use the integrated delivery schedule to show you the sequence of projects, and you build your science plan to match those projects. So the information is available when it is needed. Go on to the next slide. And then they have a very specific recommendation on who should lead the science plan development process. They recommend that the science coordination group is best positioned to lead an updated multi-agency assessment of priority science needs and gaps at a programmatic level and develop an Everglades restoration science plan. The group should be tasked to lead this effort and should receive appropriate resources to do so from the task force agencies and tribes. This effort would provide much needed updates to the plan for coordinating science that came out, I think originally in 2005 and then later in 2008, 2010. And they've recommended, once again, the concept of a lead scientist that could guide implementation of the science plan, ensure completion of the work, and consult with decision makers to identify additional science needs to support supplemental plan activities. This could be an agency scientist or a contractor. Again, it's someone to help pull the effort together. It's not necessarily a science czar. And it can be a shared position. It can be across, I'll call it some of the key agencies that are leading Everglades restoration progress. And I will stop there. That's basically their recommendations. You can go back to the earliest CROGI and CISRIP reports, and they have great review and recommendations of the ongoing science and restoration process that have a lot of information we could look at to help identify what are the critical science gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for the overview. Let's look around the room here. We'll go first to the room, and then we'll go to our external participants. If our external participants would like to make a comment, please raise your hand, and we have staff over at our OERI watching for that. In the room, let's look around the room for any comments related to this topic. Nick?
I think Deb raised her hand first. You just... Nick Almond. As far as the science plan, I really think it's a good idea. Really is important for my program because I try to focus USGS science on what the needs of the resource managers, restoration managers are. And I've always used, we actually have an old document, I think it was 2004, 2005 in Interior that was an effort, I think it was led by that time by Ronnie Best. I'm not sure, it was my predecessor. But, you know, some of those things in that plan are still relevant, you know, which is not surprising. But a science plan can really be a useful tool if everyone is participating in the process. It's an open process. And also, I would say that one of the things we should shoot for if we do something like that is to keep it short. And I can't tell you how many documents I've dealt with in my career that are full of good information, but so long no one ever picks them up and actually reads through them. And I remember back in my days here at the Water Management District, we did a science plan for Lake Okeechobee, which was, you know, pretty comprehensive and complex topic. It was 26 pages. I'm not saying this plan should be 26, but the briefer we can keep it and focused on the core elements, the more successful that effort would be.
Thank you, Nick. Deb Drum?
Completely agree with everything Nick just said in terms of the length of the plan and the level of detail and the importance of science being the underpinnings for the decisions that are being made. Bob, your comment about using the two documents to sort of plug into each other, the science plan and the IDS, was an interesting concept because I'm wondering how, with the IDS is always kind of advertised as a living document and it can change. So I'm wondering how flexible or how light on its feet science is to adjust when you have those changing priorities, because sometimes these science efforts take multiple years to set up and to collect the appropriate level of data to actually do the statistical analysis that help us understand how the ecosystem is responding. So I'm just, it's a practicality question that I wouldn't mind discussing here.
Christopher?
Yeah, I think the science plan is a really good idea. I had a question about the lead scientist role. Is that envisioned to be something or somebody, or you're saying even maybe a group of people, Bob, that reports directly to the task force, or how is that kind of functionally supposed to work?
Well, I think I can give you my view on that. I think they report back to the working group science coordination group through the chairs. I mean, it's if this ends up being something led by the science coordination group, then it's your leaders that you're putting on there to report back to you. And then that will filter up through the agencies. But, you know, I don't want to say it's a creature of DOI because all the bureaus here are equal. All the agencies are involved in this together.
So I guess I see that as a good idea, but how do you make that something meaningfully different than just the science coordination group as it is now?
I would suggest because we don't have a plan.
Oh, I'm not talking about the plan, Bob. I'm talking about the lead scientist that you mentioned.
Well, I just think they're asking for someone who can put in full-time focus on this. And I've had enough conversations with Lawrence and others, and everybody sitting around this table has other full-time jobs. So we're talking about a dedicated staffing to get this done.
I was just waiting on Chris. It looked like he was stewing on a follow-up.
Just thinking very slowly, sorry.
Okay. We got, unless it's directly related to this, we got somebody in front of you, Chad.
Right. I just wanted to build on Deb's point of the timeline. I think, frankly, a 5-year turnaround is unrealistic. Congress, if we're going to get money to hire somebody to take on what is perceived new work, if it's going to take it away from take it off our plate, Congress has to do authorization. It take 1 year, another, and then she has to turn around and do an appropriation, another year. If things go smoothly as silk, I think 5 years is still unrealistic. You have to develop the plan. You have to figure out who's going to do it, who are the right people, where are you going to do it, and the scale and scope of that plan. Yeah, it's more like a 10-year turnaround. Unfortunately, I hate that it takes that long, but just it's been an eye-opener working in SERP for, quite a while. It's taken 20 years to get things from a pretty clear vision of what we wanted to do to actually boots on the ground, turning dirt. So I think a 5-year plan is frankly unrealistic. The state of Florida, for our parks and things like that, we typically do like 10-year plans. And I think that's even in our legislation, that's the period that we do them for. So that's my perspective on 5 years, I think is unrealistic.
And we got a few people in line here. I'm going to go Nick, Jennifer, and then back over to Larry. Nick?
Yeah, I'll just first respond to Chad. I think the last time we did this as a group, excuse me, it probably was less than a year to do the science plan. It was a very open and interactive process. And I hope we do it quickly if we're going to do it, because, again, I make funding decisions every year. And, I get $6 million appropriated money from Congress, and I try to steer that towards restoration programs that need science support. And the more I can stay in tune and be able to direct that money in places that make the most difference to the agencies actually implementing restoration, the better. Also wanted to mention, we're talking back about the science lead, there's some good models around the country. They're very different. Every large restoration effort, I work with 8 of them around the country. And everybody does this a little bit differently, how they run their science enterprise. The one that's most closely aligned to what was CISROP discussed is with the California Bay Delta. They have long had a lead science person. It's kind of a rotating position. It's I think anyone who's stayed in the position is 5 years. It's kind of like a 2-year position that you see if that person wants to keep going. It's usually borrowed from an agency. It's funded collectively by all the entities. It's administratively handled through USGS. And one advantage of it that I see clearly looking at them is, again, kind of what we've talked about here, and Bob mentioned, it's a full-time person doing the work that we would all like to do more of in terms of organizing and coordinating science that we're trying to do now in addition to our day jobs, which all of us have very busy day jobs. So I would encourage us, if we, when we consider this, if we do, that we look at the various models around the country and see what we can learn from both what worked well and what didn't work well in those other entities.
Thank you, Nick. And as we continue to go around the room, Deb, your comments kind of ringing in my ear on, does the science plan inform the IDS as a living document, or does the IDS inform the science plan going forward? So I'll offer that out there for the group and for Bob to think about. Jennifer next.
So I tend to always be the person with like the counter position on anything. I'm really interested to hear Gina's presentation, because I think we already have a science plan, and I think it's Recover's plan. And I think we already have positions across our agencies that are supposed to be funded and filled, and they're Recover positions. And I think we already have coordination on science, and it's the Science Coordination Group that's led by 2 chairs. And so I think we're already doing what CISREP is recommending. If we're not achieving the results that we need out of those existing things, then I think we need to look at how do we do what we already have better, rather than what I would consider the typical bureaucratic response in government, which is when we're not doing something well, let's create a new position that we think is going to solve the problem that we can't already do with what we have. So that's really like throwing a wet blanket on the discussion, because most of the recommendations I think are good out of the report. I just think the structure We already have it. We just need to energize what we already have and then implement the activities and the actions that they're recommending within the structure that we have.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Let me comment back that I think, Jennifer, you're exactly right. What we have right now is absolutely the building blocks. The only issue is there's a big chunk of restoration that's outside of SERP, and we have to incorporate that into the process. You know, half the agencies around the table have activities going on that aren't a SERP-funded project. They come from another authority or funding source. So we just have to pull it all together so it's under the same umbrella that the IDS is. The IDS is supposed to be across SERP and non-SERP. So thank you.
Larry?
Yeah, I'll start by saying great discussion here. You know, so many people have said things that I agree with. I want to just make a few things a few statements about things that come to my mind. I agree if we do something, we should keep it short, and we should look at you know, what is already sort of within Recover, and if that can be utilized, sort of revised, that would probably be the most efficient way to do it. Thinking back to the prior plan that had a date of about 2010, I can think of so many things that we understand better now. You know, things like seepage management, invasive species, how they spread, how they behave. You know, all we know now about algae blooms that we didn't know so well then. You know, so a lot of things that we've got new information on, and we need to incorporate that into a, you know, kind of a programmatic science approach. So I can see the need for all that. And I would lean towards something that's more of a 10-year horizon because I think that, like Chad was saying, something that would be in place for 5 years. By the time we get it in place, I don't know, 5 years would pass really quickly. And in my mind, we should do it in coordination with the integrated delivery schedule. But if it's a 10-year science plan, I don't think we would want it to be that nimble that it would change very rapidly. Because if we get the right things in it that are the most important science investments, I think those need to sort of play out over about 10 years. And the expectation that it could be nimble and adjust quickly, I think might be a little unrealistic. So, thank you.
Jed, your hand went down. Are you still in the queue? Please go.
So this is Jed Redwine from Seminole Tribe of Florida. I think we should be very careful about talking about science in general as a solution. I think we should focus on key questions that we want answered that address a specific limit to an existing strategy. I think that we can answer a key question in a few years and it could potentially influence an engineering process. I would agree with what Jennifer said. I think the bottom line is we have a system level science process, Recover. It needs to function. We don't need to go further than that. There's no reason, when we look at Recover, it's system level perspective. It's not SERP level perspective. And so to address Bob's response to Ms. Reynolds, I would say Recover is capable of a system level perspective that is beyond the boundaries of SERP. Good scientists are capable of seeing past bureaucratic boundaries. I'd like to close and say that it's also important we recognize that science is done by a human, by a person. The Seminole Tribe I'm 100% sure I can say this on behalf of the Seminole Tribe, we would want science conducted with an indigenous perspective, right? And that means not a perspective of a tribal member. It means a perspective of somebody who's going to be here when the project's over, who's going to live with the project, and who is going to continue to seek to nurture the ecological system upon which their life depends. And so that's what my contribution to this discussion is. Keep it practical, keep it focused in the near term, and any science that we conduct should be conducted with an indigenous perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Nick?
Yeah, I wanted to hear a little bit more specifically whether CISRP considered this recommendation to be limited to SERP or broader, because my perspective of science plan should be broader, because even if it's not relevant to a SERP project, we know everything's connected to everything else in the Everglades. It doesn't know whether it's a SERP project affecting flow or water quality or invasive species. So, and I think Jed said that a little bit, that, you know, it's good to have that system-wide perspective, but we probably should talk about that and decide whether it is or is not just limited to SERP. I also want to just say that science informs us in a lot of ways other than major project decisions that take 5 and 10 and 15 years to implement. I can think of dozens of examples where science that's done by all these agencies have resulted in changes in the way we move water. Example is the importance of peat in the Everglades. We know we're experiencing peat collapse in the southern part of the system due to lack of freshwater flow combined with sea level rise. Well, we know now that keeping peat wet is really important as long as we can. It's not always possible to keep it wet all year in specific locations, but I know that water managers here in this building know that it's important to do that, and that's part of their decision-making criteria now when they make decisions about where to move water. So just keep in mind that science can influence things on a daily basis, don't just think in terms of these long-term projects.
I'll go to Chris, and I'm going to ask Bob if he'd like to comment on that, on whether his take on it is that the science plan is comprehensive across the saltwater ecosystem or more SERP directed.
So I had a couple comments on it. I think it has to be comprehensive. I think the concern also with Recover is making sure that it incorporates other things that are non-Recover science going on. And I don't think it necessarily needs to be a new thing to do that. I think it just might need to be a broadening of perspective. To Nick's point, too, about science informing a lot of things, that's why, and what Jed said, just to reiterate, that's why you got to take a question perspective and have hypotheses. If you don't do that, you end up with science for a specific project that's not very useful outside of that. If you take that question broad perspective, you'll end up with science that can be much more useful and much more informative to SERP and other restoration projects.
Bob?
Well, just on those two last points, I think CISRP was very clear that they expect this to be a comprehensive science plan across both SERP and non-SERP projects, because they recognize that the non-SERP projects are foundation projects in many cases, and the benefits of SERP won't be realized if those other projects aren't put in place correctly. So they do see that, and I think their perspective on the science in general is just what we're talking about here. You develop hypotheses and questions, and then based on that, you do very targeted monitoring and research to answer those specific questions. And hopefully those are both short-term and long-term questions. And I will stop there.
Thanks, Bob. Looking around the room for last comments. This has been a great discussion. Lawrence?
Yeah, I'd just like to add on to what Bob said. You know, CISRP was looking, and when they asked the science coordination group to do something, it's because the science coordination group is not Recover. You know, Gina, where? Okay. Sorry. But, you know, this is the broader Everglades that includes SERP and non-SERP. So I would just, I'll stop there and let Gina take it. But yes, take it away.
Thank you. And Gina, as you move forward, I'm going to ask you if you could add some commentary to that conversation about the saltwater ecosystem and SERP as it relates to your presentation.
That's my plan.
Thank you.
Yeah. Keep pushing the button. You just have to click next slide. Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Gina Ralph with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Glad to see you all in person. So when I was asked last week to give this presentation, I was asked to give a general overview of Recover because there would likely be new members to the Science Coordination Group and Working Group. And looking around the room and hearing the voices on the phone, most of you are very familiar with Recover, and most of you are actually members of Recover. So instead of giving the presentation that I had planned, and I'm happy to talk offline about what Recover is, who we are, what we do, I'm just going to go ahead and move on to really address what we've been talking about. Because with Recover, we are supposed to ensure that SERP implementation is guided by the best available science. So I want to talk a little bit about what Recover has planned. What is in Recover's fiscal year 2022 to 2026 5-year plan. It's very similar to what SISREP is asking for. And we've broken it down year by year into steps that can be implemented in order to get to this larger science plan. Now, Recover is authorized simply to look at SERP. It's a system-wide perspective to understanding, addressing SERP uncertainties, understanding how we can improve design, improve planning, provide the best alternatives for different projects. And so we have a way to do that that has been laid out. What we need from the Science Coordination Group is we need assistance in understanding all of those other non-SERP science applications, monitoring that is taking place so that we can leverage and utilize that information in this larger science plan. So our ask is to work in parallel with the Science Coordination Group to come up with this comprehensive plan that SISREP is requesting. So let me tell you a little bit about what Recover has been doing. Recover has recently updated our conceptual ecological models. The conceptual ecological models they cover all of the information that we need to understand in model world how a system works. What are the key drivers? What are the uncertainties? Those are the things that we have been working very diligently on and across the different regions in Recover. We have 5 different regions, Lake Okeechobee, the northern estuaries, the greater Everglades, the southern coastal systems, and the new Southwest Florida module, which is highlighted in yellow, which was just approved in 2022. So the teams have been working on updating those models and updating the associated hypothesis clusters. This is our idea, our series of hypotheses on how these systems work. And it also identifies key uncertainties. So this is one of the key fundamental steps in generating a science plan. We need to address our uncertainties. Where are our gaps in knowledge? Where are our gaps in science? Where are our gaps in monitoring that can lead in and reduce that uncertainty? We've also been conducting monitoring for quite a while now. And so the monitoring and assessment plan monitoring that we've been doing, what uncertainties have we reduced? That is also something that is key and fundamental that we have addressed with these updated conceptual ecological models and hypothesis clusters. Those are, pencils are down. Those are undergoing a Recover review. I don't have a timeline for when the Recover review will be complete, but I will be informing everyone at our Recover Leadership Group on February 16th, so we need to figure it out before February 16th. We have also been looking at our performance measures. We use performance measures to assess different alternatives as we're planning for different SERP projects. And as part of the Biscayne Bay and Southeastern Everglades Ecosystem Restoration Project, the team, including Recover team members, have developed new performance measures that will help address uncertainties associated with accretion, subsidence, and sea level change. So those are a couple of the things that we've already done. We've also been updating our adaptive management plan. In our SERP system-wide adaptive management plan, we have identified a series of uncertainties, that which we know we need to learn a little bit more about, and we have the science to help inform those. So that was developed several years ago. We are in the process of going through that and updating to understand, once again, what uncertainties still exist, what is no longer uncertain, and then do we have sufficient monitoring or research to address that question? What are we doing right now? Well, we've been collecting data since 2004, and for some projects, a lot earlier than that. And we are going through a monitoring and assessment plan synthesis. Synthesis means many different things to different people. And so Recover has defined what synthesis means for our monitoring and assessment plan. And that information will be ready in fiscal year 24. So the team is diligently working on that. We need to understand what we know before we can say what we don't know or what else do we need to know. Based on all of those in fiscal year 25, we will actually start evaluating our monitoring and assessment plan. And as part of that, we have asked the Science Coordination Group to host a monitoring workshop. When we have our meeting in March, I will come to you with an overview presentation that really defines our ask. And at that point in time, all of the agencies will be given a survey. The survey is designed to understand what monitoring your tribe or your agency is currently undertaking. Where are you conducting that monitoring? What are the indicators being monitored? How long is your data set? What are the objectives? What are the methodologies? We will take all of that information and perform a crosswalk with the monitoring and assessment plan, monitoring objectives, locations, and methodologies to understand where we can leverage that data and where we may have gaps. And these are for key indicators across the region. So my ask to each member of the Science Coordination Group is when you get that survey, you'll have 30 days to complete it, that you take it back to staff at your agency or your tribe, and you fill it out. And you send me back one monitoring survey per agency. So then our Recover team can take that information and do our crosswalks. In addition, because the Southwest Florida module is very new, we don't have monitoring set aside for that area as of yet. So on April 17th, we are doing a pre-conference workshop at GEAR where we've invited individuals, or the invitation is coming, to come and work with us to identify monitoring that's ongoing in that region that Recover may be able to leverage, or existing monitoring in which we need to add additional stations or site locations to apply that same methodology to collect that data on whatever indicator it is that we need that data for. Wading birds, alligators, vegetation, whatever that parameter that needs to be monitored. So mark your calendars. If you have monitoring or if you work in Southwest Florida, we will be knocking on your door and asking for that type of assistance. And so with all of this information, what are we going to do with it? This information, it's going to be a lot. And as Jennifer said, Recover needs resources. I went up in October to Washington, D.C., and we asked all of the agencies and tribes to look internally to identify if you have people that you can allow to help work with Recover on all of these things. Because it's all one system. We all have the same goal of restoration, and we're really hoping that we can work collaboratively with all of your agencies in pulling together this information. So once Recover does its thing and evaluates our map and we have a map update, the plan isn't to simply say, hey, Science Coordination Group, now it's your turn, add your stuff on. We want to do all of these steps in parallel. So when we're doing synthesis, we're hoping that if it's a non-SERP related or not a MAP monitoring assessment plan contract, that you can help do the same type of steps to get us all to that same goal of this coordinated science plan. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gina. I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to walk around the room, and we're going to look for our online participants. Do we have any hands up online, Kevin? Not at this point. Thank you. Eric?
Really appreciate the presentation on this one. And the focus on monitoring, it's kind of hits close to home for me. So I'm hoping that in the process of developing the surveys, we're looking at the stability of the support for those monitoring programs and looking more carefully at what type of program or what portion of the program they're tied to. Over the long haul, I've noticed that a lot of our monitoring is focused on specific projects that are subsets of the whole. And we try to, of course, make these work together very well. But as projects go online and then come offline, those funding sources change. The focus of those monitoring programs change, and we could lose fundamental information that we've come to be reliant on and not see it coming if we're not careful about that. So it's kind of a question and kind of a plea in a way that makes sure that we're focused on that part of it, that stability and where that funding, how do we really hold the support for these things. That's important to us.
Yep. So I'd just like to say that I'd like to at first separate recover monitoring from project level monitoring. For SERP projects, each project has its own monitoring plan. It also has an adaptive management plan that has associated monitoring. As you said, each one of those has a project life cycle in terms of how long that parameter will be monitored. Recover is broader than that. Recover is set up, the monitoring assessment plan, to look system-wide. And so we look for the individual projects to give us higher resolution in a certain area of the SERP footprint. But the monitoring and assessment plan is going to look from the top of the system to the bottom of the system, and that funding, we have dedicated recover funding for that purpose.
I just say thank you, appreciate that, and you're hitting right on the point that I'm watching out for here. It's really critical.
Christopher?
Thank you. Chris Cobble from NOAA. So I think this is great that Recover's doing this. Hearing what we just talked about with the science plan and looking at your map up here, I would request that when we fill out these or get these surveys, we draw the boundaries a little bit broader to be more comprehensive so we don't have to ask agencies twice where their monitoring are, in particular as we're spinning up the coral reef working group and with NOAA, we know that's a really tight line to the shoreline on the southwest of Florida shelf for both the Southwest Florida and Greater Everglades system, and we know the water doesn't stay there. And Adam can speak to this from his fishing background too. So it's important that we make sure we're capturing what's going on in the coastal areas and even some more of the downstream areas as well.
Chris, I couldn't agree more. This is the recover map, but the map you will get as part of the inventory is a lot broader than this.
Perfect, thank you.
Stephanie, and then Deb.
Thank you, Stephanie Romagnac. Gina, you mentioned the call for recover staff, for agencies allowing staff to be engaged. And I feel like I've seen some new faces and heard some new names. Can you comment on the status from the agencies and expectations as a result of your call for help?
Stephanie, thank you. I think in March I'll give a reminder of that request. We didn't get the resources that we had hoped for in terms of people from the agencies, so I will send the same plea again in March as a friendly reminder. But thank you for bringing that up.
Deb Drum, and then we're going to go to Melanie Naja on the virtual.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate the presentation, Gina. Recover is such an important program. And really glad to hear the status and what the direction is, and I'm really looking forward to filling out the survey as well. I'm going to need some guidance from this group to just kind of help me out here, because when you talk about Recover, I understand the connection with SERP, and then you have other systems that are going to be part of this larger science plan. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Lake Worth Lagoon. We had a Lake Worth Lagoon Science Symposium back in November with a full day of presentations. There's a lot of science going on. We have a lot to offer. Early on in SERP, 10% of all SERP components involved some aspects of protecting Lake Worth Lagoon, and all of those elements have been since cut from that plan with reasons that have never been explained. And so now we're talking about LOSUM, and Lake Worth Lagoon is definitely part of that plan in terms of receiving releases. And so it's time that we start having honest, unvarnished conversations about including parts of the system that have been excluded. And so there's science being done, we have something to offer, we need to start talking about it in this bigger audience. Thank you.
Melanie Naja.
Hey, Gina, thank you very much for the presentation. I have two questions for you and just clarifications. So the first question is your synthesis that you are talking about, is it only to basically synthesize the data, analyze the data and present it, or it will go above and beyond asking, is the monitoring data getting us the response to the questions that we have? So basically questioning even the monitoring data that we've been collecting. And that's my first question. Second is just a clarification. Recover is only like your synthesis is only focusing on recover-led monitoring, right? You're not basically covering all type of monitoring like cross agencies to see what the park is doing, what the district is doing, what USGS is doing. It's just recover, right?
Thank you, Melody. So to answer your second question first, the monitoring and assessment plan map synthesis will solely focus on recover map monitoring. We will look as part of the monitoring inventory survey, that's the request to understand what other type of monitoring is ongoing within the ecosystem, but we will not be synthesizing that data in our map synthesis. And your first question, I don't remember, so maybe you can refresh me. I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. So thank you for the answer for the second question. That's clear. So it's just part of the inventory. Now, the first question is that the synthesis is it just like synthesizing the data, analyzing the data and getting us like the trend, the changes, and what, or it's also questioning if the monitoring data is getting us the answers to the questions that we have. Basically going above and beyond a simple analysis of the data.
So no, the map synthesis is going to synthesize the information that we have gained over the period of the map implementation. The map evaluation is that above and beyond. So once the synthesis is done, we are going to look at a series of questions to understand whether the current monitoring and assessment plan is providing the information that we need to assess achievement of SERP goals and objectives, to address uncertainties. So that will happen in fiscal year 25.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you.
Jed Redwine, and then we're going to go to Lawrence Glenn.
So thank you, Gina, for your presentation. I always appreciate discussions of Recover, and Recover is one group that I will never stop working with. So, unless ordered otherwise. I want to really build on Eric's point, which is, we conduct a lot of monitoring on the Seminole Tribe. The precision that will be needed to inform SERP for SERP's needs is different than the precision and accuracy of that monitoring that's needed for the tribe's purposes. And so I think that's going to be, well, I'm 100% certain this will be the challenge with the Seminole Tribe participating in Recovers monitoring, is we're conducting monitoring. We do it for reasons that we define to be appropriate. When I look specifically at the mathematical precision and the needs of what we would need to introduce this into SERP, into operations discussions, recommendations, or into a comment on the performance of a project, we would need a significant amount of developmental process to convert our monitoring processes to suit the needs of SERP. And my expectation is that will likely be a common experience across the agencies. So, thank you. Over.
Concur, Jed. And I think it's going to be a learning process for all. And you had mentioned before, incorporation of indigenous traditional ecological knowledge within SERP and within the science plan. And we do have a path for that in terms of working with both tribes to understand the information that they can impart to us to help inform those decisions, to learn from their observations and their traditional knowledge. And then how do we incorporate that into something like a performance measure? What is the best way to do that? And I understand that USGS has been working with the tribes on a tree island metric to help, again, inform effects of our projects and hopefully take it to be able to inform design or operations of those features. So thank you.
All right, and looking around the room here. And Gina, just to clarify for my sake too, the survey that'll be sent out will be broader than just SERP. It'll be more saltwater ecosystem restoration based, is that correct? Or has that decision been made yet?
Correct. So we have a series of questions to help the different agencies and tribes discern what should or should not be included in the monitoring inventory that we're going to provide. And it's very prescriptive in terms of how we're seeking that data. And so happy to, if anyone has any questions about what we're looking for, we can most certainly talk about that so we get the best available information and that they're not just doing some kind of exercise to jot down everything that they're doing in the monitoring world. It's very specific. Okay.
Jed, your question was great because it's kind of where I was as well. And this goes back to Melody, your question, and I know the park has taken on a big endeavor to look at their science and their monitoring and to say, we have all this data. We have been asking these questions. Does my data have the power to even answer the questions that we've been asking? So as we're moving forward with this, there's a lot of wormholes we can go down, but I think that we definitely need to look at the science, know the strength of the science, have it directed to the questions that are being asked. I think we have to work together to figure out what is our timeline that we want to have to complete a science plan. What level of effort do we want to go to? What level of certainty are we all going to be comfortable with? Are we, there's just a lot in here to bite off and chew that if we are trying to go through and synthesize all the data that we have now, looking at the power of that data, there's so many years. Chad said, hey, it can take a long time to do this. So I think as we're moving forward, we need to give careful consideration to what are, and I like the question-based, many people have said that. What are the questions that we are asking? What do we have data-wise to meet that and where the gaps are? And kind of, we just need to make sure that we aren't biting off more than we need to and we have a product that is useful. So I kind of rambled through that a little bit, but just in a lot of the different, CEM work I've done over the past and all that, science plans for different projects, you have to tailor it to what are the problems and issues you have then. Because we have a 2010 plan we can go back and dust off and look at, but I know that we are way beyond where we were then. And what do we need? Jen Reynolds sits across the hall from me, and we have conversations across the hall, and she's like, I need scientists to provide me as an engineer information that helps me decide how I'm going to build something. And then from the operations side of the house, they're like, well, you've built that and you've built this, but, how are we going to operate it? And when is the change going to happen along the way that we're looking for? So I liked where Wes was talking about a 1, a 2, a 5-year check-in to where we are, because we know with SERP, it's a long time out before we see that whole system-wide response. We see interim response, and sometimes we see interim response for how the projects have been sequenced, just because of how it is, that we get negative response in some areas before we get positive response. So these are all things that I think as we're moving forward, we need to consider. And how are we going to put this? What is the timeline? Do we have interim check-ins to say what we think might happen? Just so communicating this out to the public, to the stakeholders, to Congress, to where we get our funding is so important that we need to be careful in how we put this together to provide the information that's really going to benefit all of us in our charge moving forward.
Thank you. Christopher?
I think it's a great comment, Lawrence, and a great way to go about it. I just, as we do that, I think as you mentioned, there's years and years worth of work we can go down, some of which we're not going to be able to do for this, but it's very, very important, like understanding the power of our monitoring programs, because we need to be able to say when we're done a lot of SERP, or even right now, we need to be able to say, can we see measurable changes? Can we assess the system and start to see those ecological benefits yet? And that's going to rely upon this power analysis. They take a long time. So I can see that not being done for the update, but I think maybe part of the plan might be not just these are the things that we need to do as next steps, because I think we've all probably done a lot of things where we write the next steps and we never do those next steps, but having some sort of formal timeline associated with those next steps or something like that to really put us on the hook so that we continue to work on these things that we know are important, I think would be good.
Chad?
Gina, Chad Kennedy, DEP. I was really glad to hear that you're going to be prescriptive when you make the request. And the survey, I'm looking forward to the survey. Frankly, I've been on the Science Coordination Group for quite some time, and I'm looking forward to having specific requests. Of course, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, we do everything from air monitoring, of course, water quality, and all things under the sun, including regulatory monitoring, groundwater, things of that nature. So I'm glad that we're going to get some guidance on what exactly will help you. We don't want to just just give you a fire hose. So I'm looking forward, and I was really glad that you made that statement. And I'm glad that the survey's coming out, and I'm looking forward to seeing that and working in our agency to get that completed.
Thank you, Chad.
All right, just looking around the room here. Craig?
Thanks, Gina. It made me think, we at the Miccosukee, we do a lot of monitoring as well. And it might be helpful for us to know what you're looking for, because we could maybe tweak some of the monitoring that we're doing to help with the recover process. That wouldn't take too much effort. So I think having some sort of idea of what those things or questions are would be very important.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah.
Looking around the room here for last call. Kevin, do we have any hands up online?
No hands.
Thank you. Gina, thank you for the excellent presentation and being both targeted and adaptable with your information.
John Browder just raised their hand.
Okay, we'll go to John. I'll just say a thank you to Bob Johnson on the line as well. Bob, thank you for the presentation and participating in the discussion. Joan Browder, you have your hand up. Joan, would you like to make a comment?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Joan.
I'm sorry. I thought I was on, but I wasn't. Chad Kennedy's comments reminded me that one of the key places where we need to merge SERP and non-SERP is with the water quality issue, because water quality is such a very key part of SERP in a way, and yet it's not SERP. And I would think that the Chad's department could help a lot with this integration that needs to happen. And actually, it needs to happen not just in the northern Everglades, but also on the borders in the coastal zones. I just wanted to bring that up. I think that's key in the integrating SERP and non-SERP.
Thank you, Joan. We'll move into our next section of the agenda. Item number 4 is public comment. We have one public commenter here. Newton, come on up. Take a seat with a microphone right at the end of the table here, please.
Pardon my stumbling around, but the second shot got me into the vertigo situation about 2 years ago. And first of all, I just want to say this is probably the most comprehensive group of people involved in the Everglades restoration that ever meets at one time. And I appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments. It's hard to believe it was 2002 when I walked in this room the first time to talk about the EA reservoirs and the SDAs and the stuff that all these years later, we're talking about. And it's a great success story. I think sometimes we forget and we don't stop and look around and see what we actually have accomplished. Today, because of the work of the Corps and the Water Management District and the farmers and all the agencies, 90% of the water that's sitting in WCA 3 meets the federal mandate to flow into the park. And yet SERP is just partially done, but we're there in a large degree. Now, we have a problem about getting water into the park, but we all know about that one. So it's a success story here, and we're actually moving into another step, and it's highly appreciated that the group here is. Tomorrow, I go to the celebration of the completion of the Herbert Hoover Dike project. Success story. A month from now, the ribbon cutting for the EAA2 reservoir. Well, now that was interesting because I did stand right there 20 years ago and speak for EAA1 reservoir, now FEV. That's a success story. And SERP is not even done yet. So there's good things to come. I've never criticized staff. I think everyone knows that. But as usual, I'm shifting into a more difficult subjects. We have major problems with Everglades restoration because the lake is in horrible shape, getting in worse shape, and we perhaps have a mission impossible. I gave a speech on that to the American Waterworks people up in Orlando last year. It's not from me, it's from the University of Florida professor. Until we clean the lake, the Everglades can never be restored. And right now, we're going backwards, not forwards, on cleaning the lake. We have 500 tons of pure phosphorus flowing into Lake Okeechobee every year, and we're doing absolutely zero about it. We have 50 years of muck with hundreds of thousands of tons of phosphorus in the bottom of the lake, and we're doing absolutely nothing about it. Some deep injection wells might work in the mud sinks. The SDAs are failing. I wait around in them. I duck hunt. United Waterfowls of Florida, God bless them. We had a great wounded warrior hunt out there just last Saturday, and we're having one again this Saturday. Incredible what we were able to do because the district worked with us and allowed us to go a few places where there's still some open water left and not cattails, and also a little bit of hydrilla, not muck bottoms, that the SCAs have turned into. And I had a meeting with the vegetation people here, wonderful people. They're doing everything they can. It's not their fault because they don't control the water that goes into the SCAs. Mother Nature has a lot to do with it. And then we have too many politicians with their hands in the business. Until we get the SCAs working, you're never going to make Q-Bell, which is 2026. Why are the SCAs not working? No SAV. Why is the lake not working? No SAV. So I challenge this scientific committee. Let's get some SAV back in the Lake Okeechobee and start cleaning it up. Let's get a method to get the muck out of the bottom of the lake using deep injection wells will work, and take it. It's a slurry. I think we've had some discussions on deep injection wells. They work, but we're doing nothing to clean up the lake. And at this point, the STAs are going backwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Newton. Sandy, do we have any virtual commenters?
No, not.
Thank you, Sandy. So from here, we'll move into our agenda item number 5, which is our planning session procedures. We'd like to ask Alan to give us a review of the ground rules.
Just one moment, James.
We can make it up there. Here we go. Might have to display here.
Oh, fantastic. That's easy.
Might have to like.
That's going to be interesting. Okay, and then I'll leave the PowerPoint after this. Hi, everyone. This is Alan Childress speaking to you here in the room and also online. Good to see everybody. Glad to be back with you here today. And thank you for the very animated and involved discussion so far today. Before I jump into the PowerPoint, I wanted to just bring up a couple of things as a reminder of the working group and what we've done in the past a little bit. So on our main website, if you go to the main menu, I thought that this was just under the task force and overview, explains who we are, what we do, where we work, and here is a reminder of how these different bodies interrelate. We have the task force. Members of the working group and SCG are here today. We also have subgroups and teams that we can form as needed. Sometimes there's a specific task we need identified, and in the past we've done that. If there's something that we need to have some specialists and experts work on, we can do that. We also have just recently created, as you ratified Wes Brooks for the Florida Corals Reef team, so we can establish teams. And around and supporting all of this is stakeholder engagement. So just as a reminder of how our structure works. And then also, under programs and under the restoration program overview, one of the things that we had done the last time we gathered together to kind of have this thoughtful discussion of where we're going for the next year and some of the things that the working group and SCG can do to move restoration forward, some of that we did was talking about communications. And there was some thoughts about reports and how can we make it work better for everyone. So we did revamp some of our reporting documents, our biennial report, to make it easier. For a reminder of those who aren't as familiar with our task force, we have 3 overarching strategic goals. The first one is primarily what we've been discussing today, is that goal 1, getting the water right. That's where you'll find SERP. That's where you'll find some of the non-SERP and foundation projects and the water quality projects. So even though our reports have changed and they're not reporting literally across our 3 goals, they are nested within. So if you look at our biennial report, this is how it's organized. We also have 2 additional goals. habitats and species. Talking about protection and restoration of habitat. This is some of the land conservation efforts, historic acquisition efforts, things of that nature. We also have invasive exotic species that we address. And then goal 3, which really focuses in on water management, the flood control, looking at Herbert Hoover Dike, that's where this occurs. So our reports and our efforts capture a lot more than STRP, and I just wanted to bring this up as a reminder. And underneath all of it, here in this bottom blue band, is restoration science. So I thought this might be a helpful visual to guide some of the discussion, because we've been focusing a lot right here, and there's other parts and pieces we might want to consider in the discussion going forward today. Now, Jose, if you can magically get my PowerPoint up. Just a minute. Yep. Perfect.
Here we go.
Thank you kindly. And thank you, Lawrence, for signing in to allow us to bring up the website. Appreciate that. All right, our planning session. We have already had a great start to the day and the discussion. Just as a reminder, we're looking at planning out this year as in addition to some of these larger concepts that y'all have been focusing on with the science plan. Reminder here that we want to talk about not just the meeting content, but the format, how we want to gather together, and the joint meeting schedule that Adam had mentioned earlier. And the mission of our working group and our science coordination group and all our subgroups is really to support the task force in its efforts, as a reminder of that structure again. And the duties of the working group, a lot of it is about reports and satisfying any priorities assigned by the task force, but we can also identify some of these issues that we want to bring towards them as well. And we do have the authority, the working group has the authority to establish advisory bodies, designate different advisory bodies as needed to get input and advice from a broad group. And the science coordination group is the science piece of all of that, very similar in its duties, but it's talking about that science coordination plan. You can see that bullet. And also they can have some subgroups to focus in on specific topics as well. Now, for our open discussion, I appreciate everyone who has been mindful of the people watching online, so you can announce yourself as the discussion goes. That's very, very helpful, and I appreciate people who've been doing that because it helps bring them into the conversation and understand who's speaking. And all of the discussion earlier has been captured, and we're going to keep moving forward with that. And trying to capture some of your concepts on this. I'll be bringing up a blank Word document to try to get some bullets and thoughts as we go through this next session, but that will be in addition to some of the meeting notes that have already been taken that aren't going to be on screen. And these are a couple of prompts that we had come up with prior to today with your chairs, looking at some of the, not just the science plan or a big document, but other topics that we might need to address, and the format and structure, what we're going to look like moving forward, and how that would be best arranged. And it can be a mix of all these things and lots of different ideas. And remember that diagram with the goals. There's more than just getting the water right. There are other issues. So please think broadly and creatively. And I'm going to go ahead and leave this up for a moment, and then I'll bring up a Word document so I can take notes live as we move forward. So James and Lawrence.
Thank you, Alan. And from a process point of view, I'll put our members at the table here and online on notice. We're going to go around the room and call on our members to join the conversation. So giving you a minute to get things thinking. Lawrence, would you like to kick it off?
I thought, as we discussed, how to go about this meeting today, really we were trying to bring everybody in the room before the year started. Get everybody at the table looking across at each other and really putting careful thought into what are the issues that this body needs to tackle over this year. We want to make sure that the meetings that we have are useful, they're productive, they're giving us the information that we need on the topics that are most critical at that time. So we also wanted to know what we heard Jennifer Reynolds at the last meeting say, we used to have 2-day meetings. We used to break out in a working group and a science coordination group. Would that be something that we would like to do? And then in those meetings, what are we doing? Is the science coordination group now kind of focused on the science plan? Or are we looking at other scientific items that we need to address? So really, this meeting is for everybody here at the table to say, what would be the best way to go about this for you? Knowing that we can't please everybody, but collectively, what do you want out of these meetings? What is going to help you go back and do the work that you need to do that makes us stronger as a collective? So that's really the goal of today, was to say we're all busy. We have a busy year ahead of us. How do we work collectively to be super strong and give us the info that we need to be even stronger? So that's keep that mindset as we're moving forward, and we're going to go to everybody because we want to hear from everybody at the table and that's out there virtually. So this is our meeting today, and thank you for being here and participating.
Thank you, Lawrence. We'll start with the working group members, and we're going to go around the room, and we're going to make 2 passes, so you'll have a second chance to come at. And I'll start right with our co-chair, Nick Almond.
Yeah, and just a process question. When people bring up specific topics, I'm sure they're going to be follow-up and questions in response. Are you going to kind of do that as you go along or wait till the end? I'm just curious about that.
I think it's good to just encourage the discussion. We got an hour set for this.
And one of the things, I think this is really important because getting input from all of you on what we should be focused on the coming year, I think is really valuable. We hear from the public, and we each come from our own agency and entity perspectives when we come in here, so I think everybody needs to have a place at the table when we're discussing this. One thing I'm curious about is the 2-day format, and I remember when Jennifer brought that up before, and I think it's a good idea. I think there will be subjects in which the Science Coordination Group could really use some dedicated time to work through issues, and probably the same with the working group. But what I don't want us to lose is the opportunity to meet together, because I think, for me anyway, one of the big benefits of this gathering that we have every few months is that I get to hear from both scientists and managers about what the pressing issues are that we should be addressing, and that we learn from each other. So only plea that I have is that we don't lose that aspect of it, and we build on the other aspects of it as well. As far as topics, I think we've discussed a number of them today. We could spend all year on the CISRIP recommendations. There's no doubt about that, because there would be a number of different viewpoints on that. From my perspective, I continue to hope that we focus as much as we can on the impacts of climate change as we go through what we do and what we plan. I'll make probably a little bit of a irritating statement. I think we're a little bit behind other major restoration programs on incorporating climate change scenarios and problems into our planning, and I'm continually looking for examples from them about what they do and how they do it so that we can suggest and consider those here. So I hope we keep that on the front burner.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to continue to the left. Larry?
Yeah, thanks, James. This is Larry Williams with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. A few things that come to my mind. I think that it would be good for us to continue with a focus on the science plan that we just talked about, and the timeline of having that in place, revised, operational. A couple of other things that I feel like I've seen that we ought to take another look at. I think some of the agencies have some other programs and tools that could be helpful, and they get overlooked. And they're probably overlooked just kind of out of tradition. And I'll give an example. USDA, NRCS, has some really wonderful programs for improving water quality and restoring native habitats. But we rarely talk about those kinds of programs. More often we talk about infrastructure, which is appropriate, but sometimes I think we miss opportunities because we just haven't carved out the time to talk about some of the other programs that our agencies might have. I'll give another example. FWC is an incredibly cost-effective land manager and habitat restoration, expert. And I feel like we don't talk about that sort of thing enough. Another area related to that, and this is probably a little more connected to, my work with fish and wildlife management, but sometimes I feel like we need more time and expertise on plant communities. Some of the challenges that we have with Cape Sable sparrows are going to come down to trying to shift plant communities back in a certain direction. And that's just one example. We have all sorts of examples where we're dealing with plant communities, but we don't get so deliberate about doing that. So I think that would be something that we could invest more time and focus in. And those are the main things. And I'll just say we've got a great arrangement here, and these are tweaks. These are improvements to a good thing. Thank you.
Gina. We are going to intersperse.
All right. Gina Ralph with the Corps of Engineers. So I have to say, looking at it again from the Recover perspective, the tasks that need to be done in coordination or in parallel to develop this science plan. I also think that there's a lot of information in the SISREP report that speaks directly to how do we capture climate change other than sea level rise in our modeling and evaluation tools. And I think that's something that we could collectively talk about, bring in members from the Interagency Modeling Center, of course, to help us with that. But we don't capture some of those mechanisms other than sea level change, evapotranspiration, precipitation, storm events. And so we want to be looking forward, and we also want to ensure that we have appropriate performance measures and evaluation tools to capture that, so that when we are looking at plans for Everglades restoration, we are selecting an alternative that works in the future and provides the greatest benefits in the future. So that's what I'd like to see for topics. I'm really product focused, and I'd like to come out of some of these two-day meetings with some kind of product, something tangible that we can take back and apply. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Amy Castaneda?
Hey, Amy Castaneda, Miccosukee Tribe. Some of the things that come up in my mind is, I know a lot of people are involved in the CNSF resiliency project. If we can kind of coordinate that with this group, I think it would be helpful. They're talking about doing a more comprehensive study. So either if it's the one that's already kicked off now or the comprehensive study for the project, I think that would be beneficial. I agree with the incorporating climate change, not only sea level rise. We don't see direct effects of sea level rise out in the tribe, but we do see a lot of secondary effects with the decisions being made of moving water. So I think that would be beneficial in this group as well. And also the translation of ITEC. We talk about incorporating ITEC into a lot of these plans, but what does that translate into? And so I think if we discuss that, it would be beneficial, because then we can go back and talk to the tribal members and have some sort of translation to bring back to you guys. So I think those are the big ones.
Amy,
that come up.
ITEC, is that, can you expand so I can?
The indigenous,
Is that
traditional,
the acronym?
ecological knowledge, yeah.
So
So, ITEK.
ITEK, thank
Yeah,
you.
sorry.
I want to make sure I.
Yeah, okay, and that's all I have so far. I think I need to think on this and bring it back to the group and come up with some other ideas as well.
Next, we'll go to Craig.
Craig Van den Heiden, Miccosukee Tribe. I think we need to look at Everglades restoration more in holistic, and I think that's coming about. I think the core plans on a lot of smaller projects, but looking at it as a whole, I think is really important. Looking at plant communities as well, Previously did a lot of work with plants, and it's incredibly important for the ecosystem and for the function, right? And we talk about sea level rise and climate change, the vegetation are the first things to change. So having a look at those types of things, I think, is really important. And then incorporating ITech is, just to reiterate what Amy said, is critically important. And I think sometimes as scientists, we don't see the input and the output. We just see people talking about what they remember. But there are outputs and there are data associated with ITech. And so I think it's important for us to realize that it is scientifically validated data and not just a story. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Bonzak?
Hey, Karen Bonzak, Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. One thing I'll throw out to add to the list is we've just made this effort to create our new Florida's Coral Reef Coordination Team Working Group. So I'd be very interested in hearing updates from that group as they progress. Not saying we need to dedicate a large chunk of every meeting to that, but to the extent that they have outputs or requests that are important for this group to hear, and then to bring that up to the task force level, it'd be really nice to make sure we are following up on that, because that group does have a 5-year sunset, and we're hopeful that there will be some good and exciting progress in it. Conversation, I think, at this group's level would be helpful in understanding how to incorporate any recommendations that do come out of that Coral Reef Coordination Team could be put into the recovery process or incorporated into other decision-making processes that exist. I will caveat that I am still new in learning the ropes when it comes to Everglades restoration, so take it with a grain of salt. Another thought, independent of that, that comes to mind, and this builds on something that Larry mentioned about, the other programs and tools that other agencies have. I'm hearing that there is a ton of money coming down the pike with the BIL and the IRA, and I am wondering if there is an opportunity to at least try to connect those dots a bit to understand what types of projects that are new related to climate resiliency, coastal infrastructure might be in the South Florida footprint, and something that this group should at least be aware of, or where there could be an opportunity to provide those granting agencies with additional knowledge about what's going on down here and how are those project decisions potentially could we leverage those and that funding to do better for South Florida ecosystem. And then last thing I'll say, and I apologize that this is wildly inappropriate, but another thought that might be interesting is I wonder if there is an opportunity to coordinate among this group to take not necessarily a position, but to have an expert recommendation related to some of the land use planning decisions that are going on in the South Florida region. The example I'll throw out is the recent urban development boundary expansion in Miami-Dade County that is impacting the BBC footprint. I've talked to Adam Gelber a lot about this, so sorry to throw you into the mix here, Adam, but if there's a way that as a group of experts and agencies and tribes who have been spending decades of time working through this process, if there's a way that we could at least go on record and explain the impacts of those types of decisions. I don't know if it would have any value, but it could be a powerful contribution. So I will stop there.
Thank you. Next, Jed Redwine.
And we're supposed to say what we want, right? Okay, so this is Jed Redwine from Seminole Tribe of Florida. I agree with many of the things that have been said so far. Where I'd like to put the emphasis is, let me say it like this. 2-day meetings are hard for me to attend, frankly. That's the duration of time away from our regular operating process. 2 days is a long time. I would agree with what Gina said, which is if we have deliverables for specific products, that makes it easier for me to rationalize spending 2 days in meetings, right? So making sure that there's a concrete outcome that doesn't just make sense to me and to us in the room, but makes sense to people who aren't in the room, who don't do this all the time. That's very important. My next priority would be, anything we can do to connect tribal members with the SERP process is very desirable from the perspective of the Seminole tribe. One of the advantages of connecting with tribal members is that all of them have very clear and specific knowledge about some attribute of the system. And they're very interested in learning perspectives of the government agencies and trying to reconcile why the government agencies and their traditional perspectives so often appear to be in conflict. I think, light is the best form of disinfectant, and to the extent that we can illuminate our relationships with the tribes and tribal members, we'll be better off. And we'll have a much better and broader base of support for going forward with restoration projects. So to get back to the scientific topics, I strongly agree about the focus on plant communities. I think Craig said it perfectly. Plant communities are often the first to respond to an action, and they're a leading indicator of what the rest of the landscape is going to be. I want to agree with what Larry said. I think the focus on nature-based solutions and not just engineering solutions is essential. We need to think of SERP not as an engineering project, but as a place where engineers and land managers and farmers and ranchers and members of the urban corridor and tribal members all come together to enhance the function of the regional system upon which their lives and well-being depends. The more we restate that, the better off we are, in my opinion. Now I'm just going to start going down my list from top to bottom. So the next, removing barriers to moving water south. That's a key question that we need to recognize, engage in, and address. We need to do that this year. We need to do that every year until we have that issue solved. Consistency with water quality rules across the system. We have to have upstream, downstream consistency in water quality rules. If I weren't here today, I would be completing my review of the Lake Istapoga numeric nutrient criteria recommendations, which are being revised by DEP now. It's essential that we recognize that Lake Okeechobee was once a phosphorus-limited system. Now it functions as a nitrogen-limited system. There are major consequences to that. All the water bodies that contribute to Lake Okeechobee, if they're nitrogen-limited, there's so much phosphorus in them already that they need nitrogen to grow more biomass. The water that they deliver to Lake Okeechobee is never going to be supportive of Lake Okeechobee's appropriate function. We have to get consistency around our water quality rules, upstream, downstream. That's an acute issue with the Seminole tribe. Both Brighton and Big Cypress reservations are immediately adjacent to special use districts. We need to bring the special use districts into the SERP discussion, because in the absence of bringing them in, they're having a significant, consistent negative effect on the SERP, on our attempts to restore the landscape. So we need to address that. The translation of ITEC is essential. I think that, the connecting with tribal members and connecting our processes to tribal members will move us forward in the direction of incorporating ITEC into SERP. That'd be my expectation. And then finally, I just want to say, all of our work efforts should be done prudently and efficiently. There's nobody who we work with who has a bunch of free time to just speculate into the wind. And we should be respectful of all the people we work with, all the people we work for, and all the people who will work for us, and ensure that our processes are efficient and pragmatic and carefully focused. I feel very strongly about that. And that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Lawrence, if I may, I'm going to channel Gil McRae, who's not here today, but did have some comments at the last meeting from your team. And part of his comment was it's an unusual circumstance at times to get all the decision makers, policy makers, and managers and scientists together in the same room. And that's often something that's important about this group here. So meeting together in the formats going forward, it gives a little comment towards Nick's comment on the format. So thank you. And I'm going to move on to John Mail in the working group and then let the folks online know I'll be going to the online members of the working group real soon.
John Mail, Martin County. Thank you, James. I guess my comment might also stretch the authorities of this group. I'm not totally sure, but it seems that, let me use a metaphor, if you will. If Everglades Restoration or South Florida Ecosystem Restoration were a train, 25 years ago, it took a long time to get built. It sat in the station. It seemed like there was not nearly enough energy to get the train moving. And then it started moving at a really slow pace, and the projects that had been identified, eventually authorized, laid tracks for that train, right? And they end somewhere. And 20 years ago, it seemed like we'd never even consider seeing the end of those tracks. As the last few years have brought kind of record funding level, every year seems to be more and more, the train's moving faster and faster. And I think it's behoove this group to have their vision a little bit further down the tracks and thinking about what happens when we get to the end of those tracks. And maybe it's time to start thinking about laying new tracks for that train. If we don't, somehow, some way, we're going to get to the end of that, and the train's going to have to stop. And all this momentum that we have is going to have to be restarted or maybe never started again. And I think we're really good at, I'm not saying we, scientists are really good at looking at the here and now, making observations about today and about the past. We're not great at anticipating. And I think we know enough, i.e. Deb's comment about Lake Worth Lagoon, Newton's comments about Lake Okeechobee, to know there's some gaps in a complete restoration picture for South Florida. And I think we would, sorry for this pun, miss the train if we didn't try to use the momentum we currently have to start thinking about what's next, what other projects need to be studied, and what other issues need to be addressed before the train comes to a stop. Maybe it's outside the purview of this group, but I would suggest if it's not this group, then who? It really brings together a cross-functional, comprehensive, incredible group of people that maybe we could do a workshop to identify those gaps, additional opportunities, and we'd submit that to the task force and let them be the mouthpiece for it. I guess that's probably my most pressing comment.
Thank you. I find that one very stimulating. Lawrence?
Next, we'll go to Chad.
Chad Kennedy, Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I really like the idea that Larry threw out about kind of educating us about who we're sitting next to at the table and some of the efforts they have going on, because there are a lot of efforts. I know the Florida Department of Agriculture has many activities they're doing with agriculture, reducing nutrients, and had some really great success stories, as well as NRCS on the federal side. And it seems like everybody's working together on that, but there's a lot of other things happening that I'm oblivious to, because like most of us, I'm focused on my day-to-day grind. So I think that might be something that's good for the whole group, education-wise. And I really like Gina's concept of having a product. I think that this group, the Science Coordination Group and the Working Group, are put together to give recommendations to the task force. And it seems like at the governing board and other places, it's usually like an item will come before them, and they'll be like, what's the staff recommendation? And maybe as a suggestion for that work product is we could take some of these hot topics and see if we can develop some type of staff recommendation to give to the task force for pick a topic, you name it, there's dozens of them. The other thing, it's something we don't seem to delve into, and I think you touched on it briefly, was, as Roland mentioned, when there's over 1,500 people moving in the state a day. That's including the ones that are leaving, and I think the number's actually even higher than that. There's a lot of pressure that's created on the resource because of these people moving in. They're building more homes, we're creating more impervious surfaces, they demand more water supply, and I'm not saying we're going to constrain that, and the state definitely doesn't have any desire to do that. But to maybe put a handle on that, to understand that this ecosystem is not being restored in a vacuum. There's other things going on that we might want to not necessarily deal with, but at least have an acknowledgement of it, or some type of a, hey, just so you're aware, this many acres went from this land use to that land use. Because as Roland mentioned, when people don't have their basic resources taken care of as far as their hierarchy of needs first, the resource, the natural resource, may not be a big priority for them. So I think that for us to at least be aware or acknowledge that the changes that are going on in the state might be unique to a lot of other states. And since this is a federal and state partnership, that might be something that would be worth bringing, or at least making a note of, to the task force. But and as far as the format, the 2-day session, if there's a work product, it would definitely make it a little less sit around the table, talking about things that we've been talking about for a long time.
Thank you, Chad. And I want to comment on that one, Chad. You mentioned that, and it brings to light, FWC has a 2060 report that looks at some of those population dynamics you're talking about in the state, and it's really focused on encroachment on the boundaries of state-managed lands and WMAs with population growth. But a lot of that area is covered by the self-water ecosystem. So it might be good to go back, and I can take a look at that report and reference that and see where those critical areas might be. It might be useful. I'll redirect to Chad first and then Nick.
Well, in that light, you're absolutely right. And I'll look at the South Florida, the whole ecosystem of the South Florida water management system, because the neighbors used to be farm fields, which periodically you could put a little water on them, and it may not hurt anybody. But now when you have people's homes literally right next door to the levees that are holding back the remnant Everglades, it does kind of, it changes the level of service, if you would, that's required from that facility that was originally built. So it's something I think that we at least, I don't know that we can do anything about it, but at least acknowledge that that is a change.
Yeah, I want to make a comment about several people have mentioned the product side of things, that we be assigned or we really focus on a product, but I don't want to downplay the importance of this coordination and communication. I don't have many opportunities to hear what the tribe thinks about certain issues. Chad and I don't talk every day. We're all really busy. And to me, a really critical product of this body, science coordination, the word coordination, and hearing, and I learn things every time. I learn something. I learn about perspectives. I learn about projects I didn't know about. I hear updates. So I'm not against having specific products, but I just want to make sure we continue to place value on just the communication and coordination aspect of it.
Which is certainly an outcome in itself. Track of where we were. I think we're on working group, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to go to the online. We'll go to working group, Wes Brooks.
Hey, folks, and so bear with me. I have a list here, and it's sort of hard being towards the end. So I'll just go through it. First of all, in thinking about priorities, figuring out how the working group and science coordination group can help expedite and inform the Corps' feasibility studies. It was almost 3 or 4 years ago that the task force revived work Western Everglades from the potential dustbin of history, and we're still sort of waiting for that important project to get to the starting line, let alone the finish line. I wonder if there's ways where the working group and science coordination group couldn't help sort of work through some of those difficult issues alongside the Corps. So, right now I'm thinking WERP, Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Plan, and Biscayne Bay, Southeastern Everglades. Another really important thing that I think these bodies always need to keep an eye on is storage, right? Whether it's above ground, in every cardinal direction around the lake, whether it's ASR, and both from a project level and a programmatic level. SERP only works if we figure out the storage piece. And certainly there are socioeconomic consequences as well as ecological ones for not getting that figured out. Obviously, water volumes, I'd put right alongside that. Again, projects and operation level focus. And I think we do a decent job of staying informed on that front, but I don't think we should lose focus of those things. Monitoring, a couple folks mentioned it, including water quality, obviously. That's going to be a key focus of the Florida's Coral Reef Coordination Team. And I think it just, behooves us to always keep that in mind in everything that we do. Folks mentioned climate. I'll step it up another level. I head the statewide Office of Resilience. Resilience needs to be, something that we're thinking about with this program at all times. So whether that be climate resilience or, again, even the socioeconomic benefits that these Everglades projects bring to the neighboring communities, that's really important. Folks mentioned plant communities. I'm going to lump plant communities, land management, and invasive species all together in a kind of a big catch-all here. Congress gave the task force some really important direction on invasive species that I think we absolutely need to help them follow through on. And I can't think of a time when I don't hear Mike Elfenbein and others, the tribe included, folks who live, work, breathe on this land, where they don't talk about the importance of maintaining what we have, let alone these massive projects, infrastructure projects for restoration. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we're not paying attention to those comments and finding ways to work with those champions on the ground to improve the system. Products has been mentioned a lot. I will say I think certainly it's important for these groups to be productive. What that looks like, we really have a lot of room to figure that out. I would say we need to both manage both down to the agencies and our sub-teams, but also manage up to the task force, right? We should be setting the table for the task force to make the important decisions and the difficult decisions necessary to move this whole program forward. I'm not sure that we have always been doing a great job, at least since I've been involved, of doing that. I feel like there's been a lot of catch up over the last couple of years just because of how much new work is starting. And I feel like we really need to think about getting ahead of that. And, someone mentioned laying the track down, for the program's future. And I think that is absolutely part of our responsibility here. The last thing on my list is, I think we need to do a better job of looking inward at all our agencies for capabilities and resourcing. Congress and the state have done an excellent job of getting the resources up for construction of projects. There's a lot of other things, obviously, that's happening, right? Through these bodies with all these agencies, and $1 million here, $1 million there, in some of these obscure areas where we work actually can make a huge huge, tremendous difference in how the whole program moves forward. So I think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we're not trying to match up goals ultimately with the resources that folks need to consider to achieve them. And then I'll just make a comment on the format. I think, it really depends on what we're aiming to achieve. And so I think as we keep working on figuring that out and how to focus limited time and resources on a lot of priorities, and I just listed a whole bunch, I probably need to narrow that down myself. We really should just look to remain nimble and flexible in how we might operate. That's it for me.
Thank you, Wes.
Eric Stabenow.
Right, Eric Stabenow from the National Park Service. So the thing that stands out to me so far has been the word soup that we've put together, all these main topics that we know we need to work on, and there are a lot of them. And I think that I kind of blend the idea of the structure of the meetings and what we're trying to get out of the meetings together as kind of one part of it. So when we're looking at the potential for a 2-day meeting structure, perhaps we use that structure under science coordination to do the coordination piece and share information, and also to think on both the short term, what can we do now that'll improve outcomes for the system, what can we do to better facilitate the work that we're doing together, and then also looking at it in the long term, of course, in the science coordination sense that we're thinking about what the science's needs are in those 5 and 10 year time frame for wherever the science plans lead us. So I tend to think of those, and examples that come to mind on that are the water quality issue, where we're having to deal with some new technologies, new ideas that are being thought about on the landscape, some limitations we're running into. There's connections in that water quality question to the land use, the urban development boundary, other issues like that. So there's those type of short-term thinking. But on the other end of it, we're also looking at how a system shifts over time. And those type of discussions are really looking at that longer time frame. So I have to say that when we're in these structures, we need to think about both that shorter and longer term piece. It might be just a different way of framing all of the different topics we put together on the screen if we start to think about that in the deliverable sense. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to return online to Melody Naja. Melody?
Hey, James. I think all the ideas, all the projects or topics that need to be investigated were already mentioned on this call. But I would like to emphasize 2 points, 2 topics that are, I think, critical. One topic that was mentioned by Larry is let's go back to the science plan. Let's go back to basically to the questions that are that should be driven by restoration and land managers. So what are the critical questions or topics that restoration managers need an answer to make a decision? I think this should be a workshop where we bring restoration managers and ask them what do they need, basically to make decisions for the next 5 years. So that's the first topic. And the second topic is, of course, climate change. And I'd like just to dig a little bit deeper on this one. Is the first question that I need an answer to is how to provide CERB benefits under a changing climate. And what Wes mentioned, CERB is based on storage. So under an increased temperature, evapotranspiration, what storage do we need to provide the CERB benefits? Environmental water supply, urban water supply, flood protection. So that these are critical questions. And then from that is, what's the impact of climate change on the ecology of the system, on the main species that we are currently using as indicators? Do we have enough research? Do we have enough knowledge on this? Or do we need to start funding fundamental science? So these are critical questions for me currently. That's it from NPS.
Thank you.
we'll move to this side of the room now. And Chris Keppel.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot been said already, so I'll try and keep my comments brief. The one thing I want to make is the communication and coordination, I don't view as that and products as being mutually exclusive. And I think a lot of communication and coordination will happen when we try to develop products. For those that are newer to the group, one of the things that I think the science coordination group did in the past that was quite useful was putting out some documents that were about the state of the science. And one of those was about the Everglades being wetter than we originally thought they were. And those were not the easiest documents to produce because it required all of us to reach a consensus about what the state of the science was, but they were very useful to produce, and they helped to push that communication and coordination. And I think we might want to think about some of those types of products. We've been talking about a science plan, but I'm hearing a lot now too about changing climate, I-Tech. I would throw out there social science too, as something that Everglades Restoration is behind on what many other large restoration projects are, and something we need to do better on, that we should work on. And then the other thing that I think we're going to have to put a product out about sometime soon is, why do our indicators keep trending downwards when our restoration investments keep going upwards? And I think we all kind of know the answer to that about time lags, but I'm kind of surprised we haven't gotten more requests about that. And I think that's something we're going to have to be prepared to address, and it would probably be better to get out in front of that. So in closing, I think we need to know what our tasks are for the coming year, and this is a great time to do that. We talked a bit about the science plan, but I don't know, we have consensus that that's our number one priority, and Wes listed about 10 others. I just listed 4 more. So we have a lot of lists here, and I think we need to figure out is what is our priorities, and then how do we accomplish them through the year, and I think then we can get to the methods of how best to accomplish them. Oh, and one last thing. Being from Miami, I would push that we rotate the location of the meetings a little bit. Have some either Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, just so we share the burden of the travel.
Thanks, Chris. And that is something, coming out of this meeting, this is a great session to produce a phenomenal list. There's work behind this now to try to figure out where we're going to prioritize. We're not going to get there by 1 o'clock today, of course. So we'll definitely have to have communication after we've compiled the list to try to go out to the group to get some sort of consensus on what we feel is most important. So we're thankful that everybody is being so open with communication today and putting an incredible list together. Thanks.
Yeah, thankfully we got some help back there with the word salad, as Eric said. Jennifer?
I guess I have to hold it down. Jennifer Hecker with the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership. A lot's been said here. Some I want to echo and some I just want to add to. First, with John and Wes talking about thinking to the future. I go back a long time with Everglades Restoration more in the advocacy realm, and I remember many years of us all getting together with our governmental counterparts and talking about the Southwest Florida feasibility study and how that got kind of pared down and put on the back burner because we really needed to focus on SERP. And that was a conscientious decision that everyone backed at the time because we really needed to get SERP moving. But I do think now that it is moving substantially, it's time to look again, at things like WRP, at other things that grew out of the Southwest Florida feasibility study, and circle back and talk about that, because that was always envisioned at the beginning of SERP to be understood that there wasn't as many projects on the Western Everglades side because there was going to be this effort to do that through the feasibility study. So I think we don't want to lose sight of that, and we want to bring that back into the mix. As far as sharing resources, I've heard a lot today where I just think about resources we're generating that probably are useful to you all that, if we had more time to share at these meetings, I think having a 2-day meeting is a great idea because it might allow us to do more of that sharing and kind of building those deliverables that have been discussed. We've done economic valuation studies that even have hired economists to quantify the economic benefits of Everglades projects like the C-43 reservoir, so we have a hard number for that. We've done hydrological models with the South Florida and Southwest Florida water management districts that we've led. And some of those models would feed right into like the Southwest Florida Recover team's work. with our work on the South Florida, on the South Lake County Watershed Initiative for Estero Bay. We've also worked on Charlotte Harbor Flatwoods hydrological modeling, and someone just mentioned about storage, and I think that was Melody who mentioned that. And, one of the things we learned in looking at all the different future climate change scenarios is that we will need more storage, that over time, climate change with the increased evapotranspiration, which is widely now agreed upon as is likely to occur, it will be drying down wetlands. So it will potentially diminish some of the benefits that we're trying to achieve in rehydrating these wetlands. So we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to be planning ahead and think about, okay, we need storage just not sufficient to restore to historical conditions, but what do we need to restore to future conditions? And we actually quantified that, and that is a good prototype and example to share with others who might be interested in taking that and looking at that in parts of the Central Everglades ecosystem. Another thing that we did is a habitat analysis where we looked at vegetative community shifts in response to climate change factors, and not just obvious ones like sea level rise, but also things like increased evapotranspiration to inland areas, how that would affect groundwater levels. In return, how would that affect vegetative communities and who need their root zone to hit certain groundwater levels. So we were able to map, which communities are at risk of transitioning based on that factor. So these are methodologies that could be shared and applied to other parts of the greater Everglades ecosystem. One other thought is just, we went through a hurricane. One thing we always experience when you deal with these unpredictable events is that they kind of blow your models and out of the water. Things that weren't predicted to happen until 2070 or beyond actually happened in a day because of this hurricane. Erosion to coastal barrier islands, for instance. So these are things that we need to take into account to constantly evaluate, to do that post-event monitoring, analysis, and synthesis, because it feeds into accepting that maybe like our baseline just jumps forward in a different way, and we need to adapt immediately our planning and engineering. And then the last thing, as far as for forum, I just think that in person is great, and I always try to get here. I'm from the West Coast, so it's a big drive. But I think that it's also important to offer virtual options, because occasionally, especially if we go to 2 days, it may not be feasible. So I think having both options available will allow for the greatest amount of participation of the members. Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Joan Browder.
Okay. I'm thinking again about SERP and non-SERP and integrating them, and how the Science Coordination Group could potentially help recover, extend itself, or extend into the areas that recover is not covering now, into these areas that are non-SERP but are vitally important to SERP. And I mentioned first the ones, the northern part of the system, but and the ones on the coast. I think there could be a 2-day meeting to discuss this, about how this could be productive, and what would the science planning need to be to better tie in these non-SERP features and topics that isn't being done now. Can it be improved? Could extending recover like activities and planning into those areas improve their integration with SERP and make SERP overall function better? That's it.
Thank you, Joan.
Joan? Becky Allenbach?
Hi, Becky Allenbach, EPA. So many good ideas. I definitely agree that having a virtual option helps. I too am on the West Coast, so, and maybe Jennifer and I can carpool at some point. But anyway, I think that definitely helps. but having the meetings in person is also beneficial. I think having the working group and the science coordination group be able to meet together and capitalize on that expertise is awesome as well. The other thing that, so many things resonated with me, but one of the main things was what Melody said, which was identifying basically what the restoration managers need and who can provide it. I was myself thinking that if we could identify gaps in whether it be research funding, et cetera, which is basically the same thing she's saying. If we can do that and then figure out who amongst ourselves can either provide the scientific expertise or potential funding, I think that that would be a great service that we can do for all of ourselves and Everglades Restoration. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Stephanie Romagnac.
Thank you. Stephanie Romagnac, USGS. So I think that we need to figure out what is I need to be closer. Thanks. So figure out what is the focus, and then that can help us figure out whether we're developing a project, a plan, a draft, whatever it might be, whatever the outcome of that meeting is. And then once that focus is solidified, what do we intend to get out of it? And then think about what's the right format for that, and then who are the right people to have there. And so just in terms of stating preferences, I think the in-person option is powerful when we're trying to really brainstorm and pull something together. However, I think that a virtual option should be made available for people who can't travel. And there was a comment about, or a question, maybe it was on one of the slides, about if there was a 2-day meeting, would it be 2 back-to-back days or in different weeks? And I would vote for back-to-back. And just for our continuity of thinking and brainstorming and overnight, sometimes some social evening is helpful for relationship building. And those who travel can just be here for those couple of days. And if you have to go back that night, you can dial in virtually the next day. And then in thinking about who should be here, there's been a lot of interesting conversation today about potential topics. And it just makes me wonder what the structure of those meetings could be like, and who would we want to have in the room. And so we have some really smart people here, but if we want to talk about vegetative community shifts and climate change, we might not have the experts in this room. And so how do we facilitate bringing in, for example, subject matter experts on particular topics so that we can advance the conversation and the product? Maybe some of that stuff happens in advance, getting, just throwing out ideas, right? Getting some conversation from some experts, whether they're, brought in, and then we take that information, run with it, develop a plan, bring people in from other restoration programs who've done some of this, whatever that might look like. But I wonder if we're open to thinking about bringing in people with the relevant expertise to, to really set, to make this as good as it can be. I think those were my only comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Rebecca Elliott.
Rebecca Elliott, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And, people have touched on a lot of things here that are also important to agriculture. And being the member for ag on a lot of these teams, restoration teams and recover, along with, looking at all the restoration, topics and activities, I tend to be more aware also of the goals and objectives for benefits for the developed areas and for social benefits. And it seems like with the way that things are going now, with development, with climate change, sea level rise, being more aware of that and mindful of that balance and that interaction, it is something that SERP had in mind. It is something that the task force has in mind for compatibility. And these same things apply to both areas. So I would say that maybe if you're thinking of topics or subject matter experts, to broaden it a little and to bring in more from the developed areas as well, and the things that they're seeing and the things that they're finding out, especially like plant community shifts, because I already wrote some notes, and for ag, that's very big. Changes in temperature, changes in rainfall, what's happening with water quality. So, there's like a lot of shared interest here. And I'd like to, again, go back to my agency internally and see what they think are the kind of topics that would be relevant to this kind of forum, and see what they might be able to provide, expertise from our end. But yeah, I just think it's important to be really mindful of trying to get more, I guess I'd say, the shared outcomes. I mean, both areas share these outcomes. And to be mindful of seeing if we can get benefits for both areas. SERP already had some benefits built into its projects. And even non-SERP, maybe there are some regional projects or some things that could be worked on together for shared benefits. So I think all of that should be looked at as well. As far as the format, again, I'm with 2 days, I'm with doing virtual. I agree with a lot of what people are saying. You want to give people an opportunity to participate as much as they can at the level that they can, but a lot of people aren't available for 2 days. So it would be good to have an option. But that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Mark?
Well, thank you. So I think the state of Florida has been real clear about our priorities, and as Wes and Larry have already said, I think Executive Order 23-06 lays out a comprehensive framework for how we can move forward. I'm not going to reiterate that now in the interest of time, and I think I just encourage you all to take a look at that and look at our priorities. I'd rather focus on roles and responsibilities and process, which is not nearly as interesting and exciting as projects, but I think is equally important because it's how we get the right projects at the right time and in the right places. So I've read and reread the charters for the task force, the working group, and the science coordination group, and I'm a member of the latter, so I'll just focus on that. I see words like support and coordinate and assist. And while I understand those words in a general sense, I'm still not clear on what they mean in terms of my roles and responsibilities as a member of the science coordination group. I've also attended a number of these meetings now, and I think we all agree that they are at times sort of a fire hose of information, and there's very little time for feedback and discussion. And at the end of the day, I feel very well informed. And to Nick's point, I think there's just a ton of value in that alone. If that's all we do, we can all go back to our places of business and continue on with that knowledge. But I don't feel like in the course of these meetings I've supported or coordinated or assisted. And so I would just like us to sort of think about that. And again, from like science coordination standpoint, like how do I interact with the working group and the task force? How does the science coordination group setting its priorities? Are we doing so independently? Are we responding to requests? How do we reach findings and deliver those findings? And crucially, how does the responsive party respond? And are they required to come back and respond to us and sort of explain to us what those outcomes are, to have that continued dialogue as we work towards the final outcomes? And I think if we are a little more clear, especially we're going to need to do this if we break up the working group and science coordination group into independent bodies, like why are we doing that? Like what? Are we not one group or are we two groups? And if we're two groups, what are the different roles and responsibilities? And I think if we map that out carefully, we have a really strong foundation here, but I think we could probably reach even better outcomes.
Thank you. Roland?
Yeah, from a local government perspective, in many ways, we kind of define the water, a good bit of the watershed. At least a lot of times we're blamed for some of the water quality issues that are occurring. And yeah, but I think as a local government, we also acknowledge that we got to be part of the solution. So many of the local governments in the basins have land acquisition, preservation, restoration programs. And I think we probably need to have a little bit more coordination and collaboration of what ours should look like and how we can dovetail and further the goals of this group. I think DEP does a good job in terms of water quality through the BMAP process, but I'm looking larger, the ecosystems and larger restoration activities that we are doing, because we've purchased over 30,000 acres of land since the inception of our acquisition program, and we plan on doing much more. But how we can dovetail with the efforts of this group and the overall needs of the basin would really be helpful. The second topic I would like to see is in terms of new science, or even stretch it, innovative technologies. The Caloosahatchee Watershed Plan outlines we need about 500,000 more acre feet of storage in the Caloosahatchee, and that's that's a couple C-43 reservoirs, and it's just kind of daunting to think that may happen, or at least being able to purchase that type of land. With that regard, I'm not sure if we can ever get to that point where we're purchasing that much. And so I'm anxious to see what this group thinks of some of these innovative technologies or some of these new ideas that in many cases are brought out by the industry or proprietary. But maybe, we should open up our minds and our eyes and see if there's some things out there that maybe we can reduce our footprint or achieve some of our goals without the massive amount of land acquisitions that are occurring, or if we can provide more storage or more water quality treatment with some different ideas. So I'd like to see this group. If they don't hear from you now, they'll hear from you later on down the road when they do go and put this project out there or somebody else champions it. So that'd be helpful.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Dan Scheit.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the discussion today. I think I have 3 or 4 points to add. First, I agree with virtual option will facilitate greater participation. Second point of historical interest, one of the first things the predecessor to the science coordination group did back in the 90s was generate a 500-page scientific information needs document for the task force and the working group. Organized mostly by sub-area, but also by topic, organized by management question or objective, and then defined what the scientific information needs were. And, just looking back on that, maybe for format, but also it's interesting, many of the questions have been answered, but many are still the same questions we're talking about today, 30 years later. And that was pre-survey. So I just point that out. And then a couple of other products that haven't been mentioned specifically. I think if you go look around the table, the agencies, tribes, others, local governments, we're spending today, I would estimate it's got to be over $100 million on science, monitoring, research, water quality, maybe 200 million, I don't know. And I haven't really seen a good inventory of that. The question is, what are we doing now? I think one useful product would even be a list of all of the interagency groups or teams that exist focused on topic or water body or recover or a specific research question, whatever it is. Many have been mentioned today. I don't know that there's an inventory of those, what their objectives are, what their research or scientific goals are, the questions they are trying to answer. I think that would be a useful product. And then I think another useful product would be an inventory of the ongoing science and research, as we sit here today. I know EPA is spending $9 million in South Florida FY22 funds on science, monitoring research in various water bodies, mostly coastal. I doubt that many people around the table have knowledge of that. And in order to just facilitate better coordination and communication, I think an inventory of what's being done now would be helpful. And when you get to the point, coming up with a science plan, one of the first questions is, well, who's already doing what? So, and we need that in order to ensure that our efforts are efficient and coordinated without redundancy. So those are my thoughts for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Deb Braun?
Deb Drum, Palm Beach County Environmental Resources Management. I've heard a lot of things around the table that I wanted to reiterate my strong support for. I really agreed with Nick's comments about looking at the impacts of climate change. I thought that was really great input. Larry had mentioned to focus on the science plan, and I also agree very strongly with that. I really liked Rebecca's input on getting more shared outcome inputs. I think that there's a lot of value that can come to this group by doing that. And I also really liked what Roland said about better coordinating and collaborating in our local efforts, because we probably have more going on than most people realize, and it can be significant regionally. All that being said, obviously this group, I think the first priority is Everglades restoration progress. That's why we're all here, is to make sure that those priorities get the scientific support and the attention that it deserves. Another issue that I think is a really critical issue that we should be discussing as a group is muck management at all scales. That is something that's come up locally. We probably need to start small. Muck management.
Just wanted to make sure I heard that.
I was clarifying for Alan, who was like, what did you just say?
I live on a horse farm, so this is like my everyday life is muck management.
Right. So, our canal systems are accumulating a lot of muck, and when we have the inevitable high flows that go from Lake Okeechobee or other water bodies, they end up downstream, and that we don't have a handle on it. We probably could try to get a handle on it in our canals to start with. Lake Okeechobee is a bigger issue, but it's one we all know is out there, and I don't feel like we're doing as much about it or even discussing it as we could. So I would like to see that discussed. I've been carrying around the governor's executive order 2306 ever since it came out. I have notes, I've read it, I've reread it, I've dissected it. I'm very intrigued by it. We're very excited about the potential and all of the opportunities that are laid out there. Westbrook started this meeting by asking us and challenging us to make sure that everything we recommend is as transparent and clear as everything in that executive order. I think that is essential, and I would also include the word inclusive. Are we being inclusive enough? It's been referenced around the table, but that is not only stakeholders and different groups of people, it's levels of government as well. And so I'll just be direct to say that I would like to see Lake Worth Lagoon included in a larger estuarine science focus when we focus on that science plan. Right now, as it stands operationally, systems are being pitted against each other. And these are all the systems that we're trying to collectively protect in one way or another, and science shouldn't do that. So that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Smith?
Thank you. Ed Smith, DEP. Gosh, there's been a lot said. I think keying in on the executive order, I think a lot of the things that have been said follow some of the highlights and recommendations of the executive order that just came out. For me personally, I think the two-day format fits a lot of the things that we've been saying we want to accomplish. There's been discussion of more tribal engagements, and I think that can be accomplished through the two-day format. There's been a lot of discussion about getting the local governments engaged, learning what they're doing. To Jed's point, we are all very busy. I know I wear 3 hats at work. That's my job. So it's easy for me to get siloed in my job, and having that two-day format would give us those opportunities to have the after-meeting discussions that occur, those evening discussions that we don't get when we have these one. I know for me, when we have these one-day discussions, it's usually I'm here, I meet, and as soon as it's over, I got a 6-hour drive back to Tallahassee for me. So having those 2 days, I think, would facilitate a lot of that communication, understanding what we're all doing and getting a better, common knowledge of everything that's going on. Lee County, I know, does a tremendous amount of work. Palm Beach County, St. Lucie, everybody is doing a lot of work with land management, acquisitions, different internal projects that individually they may not have a huge global impact, but I think it's that cumulative impact that would be nice for us to all recognize and see. I think having that non-SERP engagement is an important thing that we don't really get in this group a lot. And that kind of goes to the format of these meetings, and I'm not knocking it, and perhaps this is a little selfishness on my part. Pretty much every one of our working group, science coordination group meetings, we get an update from the district, from the Corps on every single project they're doing. It's a great update, but it doesn't change that much from meeting to meeting to meeting. And so perhaps we need to look at more of a cyclical, we don't get it every time from those groups, but maybe it's certain times of the year we get a bigger update so we can have a deeper, more meaningful discussion on other topics. So I guess that's where I'm getting, just looking at maybe a cyclical format of these meetings so we can have those deeper discussions, get into the science, and get a better understanding of how we're all interacted into those. I think I'll just leave it at that. Well, last thing, just I like the idea of looking at getting some kind of presentation of system-wide changes, looking at the plant communities, how they're changing for good, for bad, however it is, and then having those discussions of, okay, we're seeing a negative impact. Is this something we think is a short term because we've just changed the system and the system's reacting? Or is this the long term and we really need to refocus our efforts? So just kind of what I think, having some presentation on those system-wide, more than just the water quality monitoring, because it's easy for me, that's DEP's focus, water quality monitoring. It's easy for me to lose focus and just look at that, and I forget that there's a bigger picture out there. So.
Excellent comments. I really appreciate what everyone's brought to the table, right down to our last member bringing an original thought and comment to the discussion here. The intent originally was to go around the table twice so people had a chance to think about it and wanted to come back, but it's been a robust discussion, and we're not going to do that because of our time constraint. We're running up against a soft close at 1 o'clock here, and we do want to let you all go. So with that being said, Lawrence, do you have any closing remarks in response to this part of the discussion?
Again, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your day, out of your schedule. Everybody here is doing really important work. I see the benefit of this collective body as we move forward. We have homework. I have homework to come back and look at all this. I've heard keep it simple, but it needs to be robust. Those two are hard, but I think we can do it. And I think how I would like to approach all levels of this is keeping the end goal in mind. What's the end goal of the meeting that we're going to have? What is the end goal of this product that we want? What is its use going to be? And I think following that kind of philosophy will help us streamline our efforts and then get the products that we really need. But I thank everybody for being here today and being a part of this group, and I'm excited for this year.
Adam, any closing remarks in response to this discussion?
Yeah, first off, thanks, Alan, for putting the smiley face up on the screen there, right, to end the meeting, right? Yeah, so it was, the meeting started off for me very complex and really kind of troubling how we were going to get our hands around this tough topic, just like restoration is not easy. This science topic is not easy, and coming full circle to the end, I feel, listening to you all talk, is we've accomplished, I think, that first step, right? And so of meeting that goal, but more from an administrative side, clearly heard the, this is all a big social experiment with the in-person and virtual, and I clearly heard everybody here. about that option, right? And I get it, and we hear you about staff's time. The two-day meeting, yeah, clearly make that available. So also, what I also heard was that inclusion is important, especially between the built and natural environments, which has always been part of restoration going forward, and advancing that. And there was a lot of back and forth between what you were talking about, Karen, and you, Mr. Arlini. So anyway, I look forward to helping organize these meetings and working with our chairs to get this. And thanks for the OERI staff for helping out, making this happen today, and the district as well for lending their support for the room here. And my final comment is if we move it south, we may actually have to move it north as well, right? So we're looking at options. So thank you all.
Thank you, Adam. And I was keeping a list of themes that came up repeatedly here, but that's been summed up a little bit by you, Adam, and Deb, you did a little bit of that, and some of our other members did a little bit of that as we came around the room, so we're not going to go there. I am going to second your thank you to your staff for not only keeping the notes up here, but for the work that's going to go on in the background, organize this and cataloging this and helping us move forward. And with that, I'm going to close down the discussion. I'm going to close down the discussion portion of this agenda topic and just go to closing out the meeting with our chairs.
I want a quick announcement. It really, I think, ties in with what we've been discussing today, especially the need for synthesis. I just want to make everyone aware of a recent publication that came out. It's a synthesis of all the Python research that's happened over the past 2 decades. It's really a fantastic document. It's 120 pages, so I expect you all to go through it this evening, download it and read it. But it is really the most up-to-date, comprehensive compendium of what we've learned about the Burmese python. Some of it's very disturbing, obviously, some of it's very hopeful, so you'll find a whole mix in there. But just to show you what comes out of these kind of efforts, 37 authors on that. Can you imagine the work in getting 37 scientists to agree on what goes into a synthesis paper? We have to thank Jackie Guzzi, who's a USGS employee who dedicated the last year of her life, I think, to doing this. But those 37 authors came from USGS, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA, South Florida Water Management District, NGOs, and a bunch of universities. And I think it's just a fantastic example of both the need for stopping what we're doing long enough to do synthesis of what we've done for so long already, and to provide some management relevant research. So I hope it's published in an online journal called Neobiota, and I can get you the link if you're interested to it. It's open access. Thank you.
Gina, any closing remarks?
I'd just like to say it was great to see everyone, hear all of your ideas, and I look forward to our next meeting.
That's not this.
I think I said it all in my last statement.
I thought so. I just didn't want to pass you up. All right. Thank you all for coming. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Meeting adjourned.
Yeah.